Hi, I'm in the Mojave Desert, and behind me are a bunch of cows. But these aren't any ordinary cows. These cows are currently breaking the law.
And their presence has started a war.
We will not give up our land!
Several federal agencies have surrounded a 600,000-acre section of public land.
They're getting ready to launch stuff at us. Get ready.
And militia members from around the country continue to arrive in Nevada to join the showdown between a cattle rancher and the federal government.
Okay. Ay.
I was 75 miles northeast of Las Vegas, in a valley straddling the Arizona-Nevada border. Surrounding me were miles of desert land owned by the United States federal government. And no, I wasn't on a military base. You see, 80% of the land in the state of Nevada is property of the feds. It's called public land, and it's mostly overseen by the Bureau of Land Management. Cattle ranching has been banned in the area since 1993, and yet there are cows everywhere. Those cows belong to Cliven Bundy, a fourth-generation cattle rancher who's been in willful violation of federal law for the past 30 years. The US government owns roughly 640 million acres, or about 28% of the land in the United States. Now that's 1/3 of the entire country.
In red, you can see all the land that is owned by the federal government. Most of the land west of the Rocky Mountains, more than 50%, in fact, is owned by the federal government. Very, very little of the land east of the Rocky Mountains is, by contrast, owned by the federal government.
Everybody's heard about places like Yosemite National Park. Beautiful landscapes that see millions of visitors a year, mostly for recreation. But more obscure are the public lands administered by the Bureau of Land Management. Historically, these lands have been dominated by Western commercial land users. Ranchers, miners, loggers, the industrial users of the public lands. But then in 1976, something changed. The federal government started putting more of an emphasis on environmental conservation. Since then, there have been many flare-ups, particularly in Nevada, which has become the epicenter of a war between commercial public lands interests and the federal regulators. Today, the war is being led by the Bundy family and their patriarch, Cliven Bundy. Before 1993, Cliven had no problem with the Bureau of Land Management. In fact, he was tied to a lease agreement with them. Every 10 years, he renewed his grazing permit through the BLM. No, not that one, the Bureau of Land Management, and Cliven happily paid for the grazing fees. By doing so, his cows were given access to 160,000 acres of federally owned land administered by the Bureau of Land Management. It was actually a pretty good deal. Remember, we're talking about the desert. It's arid. There's not much vegetation or forage for the cows to feed on. In the Mojave Desert, it takes over 100 acres to sustain a single cow. Cliven Bundy only has about 160 acres of private land, which isn't enough to feed his entire herd. So for a long time, Cliven Bundy followed the Bureau of Land Management's rules because he saw it as a beneficial relationship. Then in 1993, many different governmental agencies got together and they decided to end cattle ranching in the region in order to protect an endangered species called the Mojave Desert tortoise. In protest, Cliven Bundy decided that he would continue to ranch on public land without a permit and without paying for the grazing fees. From the federal government's point of view, Cliven was illegally trespassing on their land in order to run his business, and they wanted him to stop. In 1998, Cliven defended himself in court. He argued that the federal government does not have any constitutional authority or jurisdiction to own public lands in the state of Nevada. The courts disagreed, and they told him to remove his cattle from the federally owned land, or he would face fines. And after that, nothing happened. 16 years went by. Cliven continued to ranch illegally on federally owned land, and the federal government did nothing about it. During that time, Cliven accrued over $1 million in unpaid grazing fees and fines. Then in 2014, the Bureau of Land Management finally said enough was enough and decided to remove Cliven's trespassing cattle. But the way the BLM went about this was, quite frankly, overkill. 150 agents decked out in tactical gear shut down nearly 600,000 acres of public land surrounding Cliven's ranch. They swooped in with an armed battalion consisting of BLM Rangers, German Shepherds, and snipers.
They had command centers. They had, like snipers set on that hill. They had snipers set up on the mountain there. They had 4 different helicopters that I know of.
Within a few days, videos spread online of Bundy family members being pushed and tased.
And I just saw federal agents throw my aunt on the ground. I saw my cousin get tased 3 times. I saw him pull dogs and stick it on a pregnant woman.
Those videos became a rallying call for hundreds of supporters and militia groups who flocked to Nevada to back the Bundys against the federal government. And the situation culminated into an armed standoff with the Bureau of Land Management. This documentary was made possible by my generous patrons. If you'd like to help support my future documentaries, please consider becoming a patron or member on this channel. While I was in Nevada, I somehow managed to get the Bundys to agree to let me interview them, despite their past experiences with FBI agents who approached them posing as a fake documentary crew.
Right to the back, huh?
I gotta strain this milk.
Oh.
Yeah, washed the cow real well and made sure her udder were clean and everything was clean, so the milk going in the bucket's clean. Mm-hmm. Either way, I strain it just to be certain, to clean the milk. And so again, we have.
This is Cliven's eldest son, Ryan Bundy. When the FBI analyzed the Bundys in 2011 to see how dangerous a cattle roundup operation might be, they concluded that Ryan Bundy was the most radical family member and the most likely to fight back. 5 years later, Ryan helped lead a 41-day armed occupation of a wildlife refuge along with his brother, Ammon Bundy.
Hey, Moroni, go open that gate, please.
Are we allowed to do this?
Oh, yeah. So this is our range. We're out here all the time.
So, Ryan, where are you taking us?
Right now, I'm going to take you to the one of the 2 First Amendment zones that the government had put up.
Mm-hmm. And what is a First Amendment zone? What is that?
Well, the government, in their operations to gather our cattle and to extort us, did not want free speech. And so what they did is they set up these zones, 2 little zones, and they said, okay, only within these zones can you exercise the First Amendment. The First Amendment is suspended everywhere else. Now, by the way, this is where one was. Right here in front of us, they had yellow safety fencing or orange safety fencing placed up in like a corral, like a little circle here. And they said, okay, within that circle, within that fenced area, you can exercise the First Amendment, and they actually put signs up, First Amendment zone. And we have one of those signs still at the ranch, one of the actual signs, by the way, which I'll show it to you today. All right, so this is Toquap Wash, and right here about where we're standing is where the BLM had set up their military and snipers pointing at the people. The people were right there underneath the bridge, right where those pillars are. So this is where the main events of April 12th, 2014 took place, right here. They designed this to be the most intrusive cattle confiscation that ever was. They were trying to entice us into retaliating, and therefore it would give them justification to kill us. If you ever watched the movie Red Dawn? Yep. It was just like that, okay? Just like that.
The events of the cattle roundup polarized onlookers. Many wondered if the federal government was justified in their actions. Was such an expensive, heavy-handed law enforcement operation really needed to deal with some trespassing cows?
Land management? Bureau of Land Management? Why should they have a military-type force?
Much of the blame fell on the shoulders of the man who'd led the botched roundup, Dan Love.
Can you tell me about the commander of the BLM operation, Dan Love?
Dan Love, Dan Love he's a murderer. He had another situation that he caused the deaths of 3 people over in Utah. Just a hothead and a tyrant. He's just a perfect tyrant.
In 2009, Dan Love led the BLM in an eerily similar raid of a network of collectors illegally trading in Native American artifacts stolen from public lands. 26 people were arrested, and 2 of them took their own lives. Despite a public outcry, Dan Love received a promotion and was later named Agent of the Year. The BLM assigned Special Agent Larry Wooten to lead an investigation into the Bundy cattle roundup operation. In 2017, Wooten wrote a whistleblower memo where he accused Dan Love of leading a punitive and ego-driven expedition. Through his investigation, Wooten learned that Dan Love carried a kill book as a trophy, which bragged about getting 3 individuals in Utah to commit suicide following his Native American artifact raid in 2009. During the Bundy cattle roundup, Wooten said that Dan Love created an amateurish carnival atmosphere. Dan Love essentially led the roundup like an aggressive frat boy, and body cam footage shows that his subordinates followed the toxic tone that he set.
Are you fucking people stupid or what? Pretty much a shoot first, that's fucking shoot his fucking dog first.
I called the BLM to ask them for an interview regarding the Bundys.
Generally, we really don't have public interviews about the Bundys.
There used to be 52 ranching families in this area, sharing over 100,000 acres of open range. All of them took buyouts and left after ranching was banned in the region. All of them, except for Cliven Bundy.
Or I'll say, well, there used to be 52 neighbors, 52 ranchers in Clark County. What happened? It gets to the point there's not no ranchers left because what they've done is they've broke them all.
When the Bureau of Land Management told Cliven to stop, he said,
I said, hell no. And they was using the desert tortoise mainly for excuse. They said, there's not enough feed for the cows and the tortoises out there. So I guess the cows have got to go because we're not going to get rid of the tortoises. What that meant to most people is, hey, we can't buy a permit from you, so we can't run our cows. And so basically, we're out of business.
To learn more, I visited Las Vegas to speak with a desert tortoise expert who promised to let me see the rare creature myself.
My name's Sarah Mortimer. I'm the executive director with Tortoise Group and staff biologist. Desert tortoises are reptiles, so they are cold-blooded, so they have to move from warm and cool temperatures to control their own body temperatures. That's why their burrows are so important. Desert tortoises are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. Back in the 70s and 80s, they were starting to see extreme declines in populations. There's a variety of factors that contribute to the decline of wild populations, habitat loss being one of the major causes, predation, human and urban development. When desert tortoises were listed under the Endangered Species Act, it put construction in the Las Vegas area to a complete halt.
All activities posing a threat to desert tortoises were paused in Clark County, a county home to Las Vegas, as well as the Bundy Ranch. Millions of dollars worth of construction projects were stalled, and so was cattle ranching. But developers in Las Vegas were able to negotiate a deal with the Fish and Wildlife Service, a deal which ranchers couldn't match. For a fee of $550 per acre, developers were allowed to destroy desert tortoise habitat found on building sites, and even kill tortoises if need be. Money generated from fees paid by developers was used to increase tortoise protection on federal land south of the city, and to establish a $2.3 million desert tortoise conservation center. Cattle ranchers like Cliven Bundy weren't as lucky as commercial developers. Most ranchers in Clark County had small-scale operations that were barely breaking even, and they couldn't afford to pay mitigation fees like Las Vegas developers. In the end, the BLM used fees paid by developers to buy out cattle ranchers' grazing permits, and a short while after that, it was decided that public lands ranching would be banned in all of Clark County. As Dr. James Skillen notes in his book, This Land is My Land, it was a struggle over county gentrification, in which commercial development won out over ranching.
That is what allowed then, with the developers in Vegas, when they needed to protect and preserve some desert tortoise land, the Bureau of Land Management, they went to the ranchers and said, hey, we'll buy you out. A lot of those ranchers looked at the prospects of how many cows they were allowed to run, concerns that there would be more reductions in the future, and said, I'm going to take the deal, I'm going to get out. And the Bundy family is the one family that said, under no circumstances will we do this. Absolutely not.
And so I'm the last man standing.
These days, Cliven's cows are everywhere in this stretch of the Mojave Desert. Cliven says himself that his cattle are more like wild animals than domesticated cows. He practices a hands-off approach to ranching, letting his cows roam freely and only collecting the ones ready for auction. Because his cattle are largely left to their own devices, some are unbranded, and therefore feral. These feral cows are skittish, likely to charge at you if you get too close. However, the ones that are more accustomed to people just stare you down until they ascertain that you're not a threat. His herd is spread out over hundreds of thousands of acres, feeding on the desert grass and brush which dots the arid landscape. Some of his cows stroll into golf courses. Others wander onto the interstate and cause accidents. Ironically, open range laws in Nevada protect Cliven legally in cases where his cows happen to wander where they're not supposed to.
There's cattle, open range, and that warns and places the liability upon drivers that if they hit cows, when they hit cows, then I file on their insurance and get paid for the cow. And then,
when was the last time you saw a desert tortoise?
I don't know, maybe 2 months ago.
2 months ago?
Yeah, and I'll admit, I don't see as many as we used to, but I'll tell you why. It's because the sheep aren't here anymore. Those tortoises will follow the sheep, and they eat the sheep dung. Okay, and then wherever there's sheep, there's tortoises. And the sheep don't come across here anymore. So there's less tortoises. We believe that they might eat the cattle dung as well, but I'm not 100% positive of that. I know where some tortoises are, and I thought I might do a little experiment and see if, make sure that tortoise and dung are both there in the same place and film them, see if they eat it. I haven't done that yet, but I know without a doubt they eat the sheep dung.
There has been documentation of tortoises also eating cow manure, so...
and that is actually something that the Bundys have said.
It's actually noted in a scientific paper. Now, if they're experiencing times of drought and cows are eating up all the plants and that's all they have to eat, of course they're going to eat the cow manure.
Here's the interesting thing about that is, they said, the cattle negatively affect the tortoise, and they're like, okay, well, do you have any scientific proof to that? And when it come down to it, they don't.
Yeah.
There's no scientific proof that cattle do any harm to tortoise.
I mean, from a scientific standpoint, the degradation and compacting of the soils and the vegetation doesn't make it ideal because it's taking away from vegetation that the tortoise would eat.
And you were telling us yesterday that there was they were killing them? They were putting them down, the tortoises?
Yeah, it was been several years ago now, but they actually euthanized, tens of thousands of them.
I would reject that. I don't think that the government is just killing tortoises to be killing tortoises. They did have to euthanize ones that were just incredibly sick. All of the animals, to my knowledge, that they could release were released.
You ran for office recently, right?
Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, I run for as governor in Nevada. I was wanting to make sure that Nevada was in an environment where people could prosper. I wanted to get rid of licensing. I also wanted to fix this land rights issue, okay? All it would take is a governor that would realize what a state is and kick the feds out, okay? Because, again, the state is a sovereign, independent nation. Yes, my grandfather did have a lease agreement. Yes, my father had a lease agreement. We did have a contract with the Bureau of Land Management. We did try to abide by their rules and we did pay the grazing fee, but we could see that they were purposely trying to drive the ranchers out of business. Now, this caused my father a lot of stress. He didn't know what was right at the time. He didn't know what to do.
I don't have the knowledge I have now, but I'm not going to just give up.
He began to do some study, and he started to realize that the land does not belong to the federal government. It belongs to the state and to her people.
According to the Bundys, Nevada and the rest of the states in the United States of America are independent and sovereign nations.
And that's one thing that we in America don't quite understand. We've been taught that it's one nation under God, indivisible. No, that's not true. It's not one nation. We're 50 nations.
The Bundys' theory goes something like this. The federal government is simply an entity that's given power by the states and the people, mainly for the purposes of defense. They argue that it's unconstitutional for the federal government to own public land unless that land is being used for military bases. The Bundys base their claims on 3 passages of the United States Constitution. a document which they consider to be divinely inspired. Those passages are the 10th Amendment, the Enclave Clause, and the Supremacy Clause.
Constitution, if Congress has authority to own land, it will be in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. It's on page 7. Forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Those are only 5 reasons that Congress can own land. Okay, in other words, wildlife refuges, national parks, monuments, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, none of these are within the purview of the Constitution. To me, the Constitution is so simple. It's easy to read. You know, I can understand it. The federal government has no authority to own land within an admitted state of the Union except for Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, military bases, arsenals, dockyards, other needful buildings. If it's not in the Constitution, it shouldn't even be discussed.
And one thing that I am a Constitutionalist to the point I do understand a lot about the Constitution. And I know the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. I don't have no problem with the federal government. Let's put it that way. I don't think the federal government has any jurisdiction. And I know the federal government don't own this land.
When I returned home to Toronto, Ontario, I set up a video call with Dr. James Skillen, a public lands expert, to ask him if the Bundys' constitutional theories had any legal merit. So, are the Bundys correct when they say that it's unconstitutional for the federal government to own public land that isn't used for military bases?
No. The primary legal authority, the federal government, is the property clause. So this is Article 4 of the Constitution, and it says the federal government has authority to make all needful rules and regulations regarding public lands owned by the United States. And the Supreme Court has said over and over again that that clause is essentially without limitation. You're up against, if you're the Bundys, you have a pretty steep uphill battle to show that the Supreme Court has misinterpreted the Constitution for 140 years.
When you hear the Bundys referring to the Constitution, oftentimes they're referring to it as a divine document. When I talked to Cliven Bundy, he essentially said, Jesus wrote the Constitution. These are battles over land that come from a religious understanding. The White Horse Prophecy is the idea that LDS will protect the Constitution when it's hanging by a thread. And there's a layer to the understanding that it's going to require a fight against the government, a corrupt government. And I really do believe it motivates Ryan, Ammon, and Cliven Bundy in their fight. This idea that they are taking part in the White Horse Prophecy, that they're fulfilling it to a certain degree.
Joseph Smith, he said that the Constitution would hang as if it were by a thread. In other words, it's on the thread of being, becoming ruined. And yet that it would be this people, speaking of the members of the church, and particularly the priesthood members, that would bear it up and save it from ruin.
So, do you think that's happening right now? Are you fighting?
Yeah, I've felt for a long time that I've been a part of that, yes.
Joseph Smith probably didn't say it exactly as it's written. However, Joseph Smith very much was fighting against a government that he felt was unfair, corrupt, and cruel to his new religion. And so he really emphasized this relationship between the Mormon people and the Constitution.
In the mid-19th century, a newfound religious group belonging to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormons, traveled west. Mobs ran Mormons out of New York and Ohio. In Missouri, an extermination order was issued against them. And in Illinois, Joseph Smith was murdered by a mob. When the Mormons arrived in Utah, a part of Mexico at the time, they felt like the ancient Israelites fleeing Babylon. To the Latter-day Saints, Utah represented Zion, the kingdom of God on earth. Cliven Bundy's maternal great-great-great-grandfather, Dudley Levitt, spent most of his life following the Mormon Church west. Dudley was an adherent member of the church, and when he was called to help establish a Mormon settlement called Bunkerville, where the Bundy Ranch is situated just outside of today, he immediately accepted. In 1877, Dudley Levitt arrived in Bunkerville along with a small group of the town's first settlers. They were there on behalf of the Mormon Church in order to follow a style of communal living called the United Order. Bunkerville began as a utopian commune with settlers who shared all goods and labor in common. It sounds like communism because it kind of was. The United Order of Bunkerville only lasted 2.5 years before it was dissolved in 1880. Just a quick aside, Cliven Bundy's maternal ancestor Dudley Levitt lived a fascinating life. He was a polygamist and believed that the practice, which Mormons called plural marriage, was necessary for eternal salvation. Because of that, he spent years dodging U.S. Marshals who raided Bunkerville in search of Mormon polygamists. He also liked to taunt law enforcement to try and stop him. Visit the Bunkerville Cemetery to see where Dudley is buried next to his 5 wives. Because I know you're wondering, he had a total of 48 children. The first public lands in the United States were created around the end of the Revolutionary War, when the original 13 colonies agreed to surrender all of their territory west of the Appalachian Mountains to the federal government.
Some of the colonies had significant western lands, and other colonies were quite small and didn't have access to those lands. That land went to the national government with the understanding that it would be used for the good of all the states. The federal government then acquired, over the next century, roughly 1.8 billion acres of land.
The federal government gained ownership of the land through purchase, conquest, and cession. This came through things like the Louisiana Purchase, the Mexican-American War, treaty with Great Britain, and purchase of Alaska from Russia.
As the federal government acquired all of this land, there was a general understanding that the federal government would dispose of it all. And so from the very beginning, Congress began passing different laws to transfer land from federal ownership into private ownership.
Through the Homestead Act of 1862, a large amount of rich agricultural land in the Midwest was transferred and sold for cheap to anyone who agreed to farm it. Most homesteaders settled in the eastern states and the Midwest. No one really wanted the arid western desert lands that weren't viable for farming. Therefore, much of the West stayed in federal ownership.
Really, these were the leftover lands, the lands that nobody wanted.
Western public domain lands attracted ranchers who, for almost a century, enjoyed a great degree of autonomy. But this led to range wars between sheep herders and cattle ranchers, as well as overgrazing and soil degradation. Since no one who used the land actually owned it, no one treated it with much care, a classic dilemma known as the tragedy of the commons. This is what happened in Mount Trumbull, Arizona, also known as Bundyville. Bundyville was founded in 1916 by Abraham Bundy, Cliven's great-paternal grandfather. Before Abraham founded Bundyville, the Mexican Revolution forced him and his family to flee a polygamous colony in Sonora, Mexico that was taken over by rebels. When he returned to the States, Abraham read about 640 acres of land that the federal government was giving away for free. It was located in hardscrabble wilderness, isolated from the rest of Arizona by the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River. But Abraham was looking for freedom, so he took his family to live there. There they ranched cattle until its lush meadows and knee-high grass was depleted and the soil was rendered brittle, degraded by overconsumption. The same story unfolded all over the western public lands, causing Uncle Sam to step in. In 1934, Congress brought an end to the grazing commons when it passed the Taylor Grazing Act.
I used to call them Taylor grazing people, and it was in later then they become BLM.
Then in 1946, President Truman established the Bureau of Land Management to oversee public lands used by miners, livestock ranchers, and loggers. During its early days, the BLM's primary purpose was to serve natural resource development on public lands. Unlike the National Park Service, the early BLM didn't concern itself with environmental conservation. As long as ranchers and miners were happy, so was the BLM. Back then, cattlemen filled the seats of grazing advisory boards. They called the shots in a system of self-regulation known as home rule on the range. Due to these circumstances, the BLM was derided for the first 3 decades of its existence as the Bureau of Livestock and Mining. The BLM became responsible for 340 million acres of land considered too dreary and unattractive to be a national park. Lands just like the desert backcountry that the Bundys call home. Cliven Bundy was born in 1946, the same year that Truman created the Bureau of Land Management. 2 years later, his father built the Bundy Ranch in 1948, long after the grazing commons were closed. Therefore, his father had to apply for a grazing permit through the BLM to ranch on land owned by the federal government. In 1974, Cliven was 28 and had just purchased 1,400 head of cattle from Mexico to take over his father's ranching operation. In retrospect, he couldn't have picked a worse time to get into public lands ranching. That's because concerns for the environment became a hot-button issue during the 1970s. Environmental hazards were such a concern that 20 million Americans nationwide attended the first Earth Day demonstration, making it the second largest demonstration in American history.
During the 70s, an unlikely champion of the environment emerged, and his name was Richard Nixon.
Each of us all across this great land has a stake in maintaining and improving environmental quality. These problems will not stand still for politics or for partisanship.
President Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency
and signed into law the National Environmental Policy Act. He also passed the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Energy Policy and Conservation Act. Then in 1976, Nixon's successor, President Gerald Ford, codified into law the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, called FLPMA for short. With FLPMA, Congress declared that it would retain the public lands in its ownership. Prior to FLPMA, they still thought that they'd give or sell the land away. FLPMA legally obligated the BLM to manage public lands for multiple uses, like cattle ranching, as well as environmental conservation and recreation. Essentially, FLPMA assigned to the BLM two contradictory goals: to protect and preserve the public lands, while also encouraging commercial resource use of the lands, such as cattle ranching. After FLPMA, the Western public lands became a metaphorical battleground, pitting industry against environmental groups, with the BLM caught in the crossfire. However, things didn't get hairy until Jimmy Carter became the 39th President of the United States.
Our program will emphasize conservation. We'll emphasize research on solar energy and other renewable energy sources.
President Carter appointed many leading conservationists to his administration, such as Cecil Andrus, who he chose to head the Department of Interior, which oversees the BLM. To Western commercial land users, it seemed like the Carter administration wanted to regulate them out of business. Suddenly, they found themselves in a position where they either had to comply with new regulations or face penalties such as heavy fines, imprisonment, or both. Instead of compliance, they chose to fight back. Their fight was called the Sagebrush Rebellion, and the rebels referred to it as the Second American Revolution, this time against a colonial federal government instead of the British Empire. The rebellion was led by politicians who introduced bills claiming state control of public lands within their state borders. But the bills introduced by the Sagebrush rebels didn't change any laws. Although Nevada and many other western states claimed ownership of the public lands, it was an assertion that was unlikely to ever fly in court. The frenzy of the Sagebrush Rebellion quieted down to a muffled whimper after then-presidential hopeful Ronald Reagan endorsed the movement. And during the 1980 presidential election, Reagan won in every state west of the Mississippi. Although President Reagan's administration eased the anxieties of public lands ranchers like Cliven Bundy, the environmental laws passed through the 70s were still in effect, and environmental groups continued to sue federal regulators into following laws like the National Environmental Policy Act. In the Pacific Northwest, the spotted owl, an endangered species, brought the public lands logging industry to its knees. Witnessing this greatly disturbed Cliven, who became certain that the federal bureaucrats would come for him next. As tensions heightened, Cliven heard environmentalists chant, "No moo by 92, cattle free by 93. He saw one public lands rancher after another being pushed out.
Monetary claims against the U.S. government ruled on the case first brought by Wayne Hage Sr.
He heard about Agenda 21.
Agenda 21.
An action plan of the United Nations, which he interpreted as a plot to force rural Americans to move to cities. All of this pointed to a new world order. It terrified him, and he needed to find hope. Cliven started to attend conferences where he learned that the federal government doesn't own public land. He learned that the state and federal government were subordinate to local county governments, and that the county sheriff was the highest legal authority in the land. His friend, a neighboring rancher named Keith Ney, shared with him a book he assembled containing arcane Mormon scripture and constitutional theories that rejected the concept of federal land ownership outside of a set of very narrow circumstances. Learning these things gave Cliven a great sense of relief. He wasn't the one in the wrong, the government and the justice system were. The bureaucrats just didn't understand the Constitution as well as he did. Because if they did, they'd understand that what they were doing was unconstitutional.
You talk about Dick Hawver as a movement, because we're not going to back down, we're not going to go away, and we are winning, and we will win this battle.
Dick Hawver's battlefield is Nevada.
It's the bureaucrats forcing regulations down on us.
The federal government says it controls 87% of the land in Nevada.
They don't own it. They have no documents to own it.
Dick Hawver says the state owns all this land. And his argument is simple.
I'm fighting right here.
He says the Constitution never gave the federal government any power over this land.
They have 26 feet of regulations, and I'm going to beat them with a little Constitution that's not a quarter-inch thick.
To put all of this into perspective, here's Dick Hawver, a county commissioner and rancher from Nye County, Nevada, who on the 4th of July, 1994, ran a bulldozer through a BLM closure after making a speech touching on all of the hallmark constitutional arguments against federal land ownership that the Bundys regularly espouse.
That's the highest level of government in America, is the one that's closest to the people. That means that your county elected officials are the highest level of government in America today. Therefore, all the public lands within Nye County are owned by the state of Nevada, subject to existing rights.
In attendance and only visible for a split second is a much younger Cliven Bundy.
What agency is the enemy here?
Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, and if you can find anywhere that you can put the Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife, I will eat it raw.
That same year, the BLM canceled Cliven's grazing permit and demanded that he pay his overdue grazing fees and fines. Cliven agreed to pay, but only to what he viewed as the proper authorities. He sent a check to Clark County. However, Clark County wasn't responsible for collecting grazing fees, the BLM was, so they sent his check back. Cliven's battle with the feds began to receive a lot of attention from the media. Journalists liked him because he gave good quotes such as, "This fight today is no different than the civil rights days, when Rosa Parks defied illegal local law and took her rightful seat in the front of the bus." Cliven's battle with the BLM took place during a second Sagebrush rebellion called the Wise Use Movement.
We intend to destroy the environmental movement once and for all by offering a better alternative, the Wise Use Movement.
Ron Arnold is a prominent figure in the movement, which is actually a loose amalgam of as many as 400 groups of miners, loggers, ranchers, and corporations like Exxon.
The Wise Use Movement involved more aggressive opposition to federal land ownership than the Sagebrush Rebellion of the 1970s. In Nevada, a Forest Service ranger's office was bombed and his minivan was detonated with dynamite. In Reno, Nevada, a satchel charge was hurled onto the roof of a BLM office. Threats became commonplace, as did stories of federal employees being attacked and shot at. Cliven's son, Ryan Bundy, was also involved in the Wise Use Movement. In 1994, Ryan ran a toll booth at Zion National Park after telling a park ranger that he didn't recognize the Fed's authority. Ryan was arrested following a 21-mile police chase.
I chose to use that route of travel, and they wanted to charge me at the gate of Zion's. And I just said, hey, you have no authority here. This property doesn't belong to you, and I'm not going to pay you to go through here. So I didn't.
In 1998, the BLM prepared to impound Cliven's cattle, but then they learned that they would likely be met with armed resistance. With Ruby Ridge, Waco, and the Oklahoma City bombing in recent memory, the BLM decided that it would be too dangerous to attempt to round up Cliven's trespassing cattle. In 16 years, Cliven tripled the amount of cattle his original permit allowed him to ranch on public land. 160,000 acres expanded into 600,000 acres. By 2012, his livestock were no longer just in Nevada, they were also in parts of Arizona. In March 2011, the BLM spent at least $287,000 to count Cliven's trespassing cattle. Nevada's Department of Agriculture estimated that his entire herd was worth roughly $750,000. The BLM estimated that he had 900 cattle, each worth $1,000 a head. Cliven disagreed. He said that he only had around half that number. The BLM published a list of impacts his herd had on private property and the environment. A civil servant was attacked by a Bundy bull. Crops on private land were destroyed, cattle shot in springs, damaged rare plants, rubbed against ancient Native American petroglyphs, and they halted environmental restoration projects. In 2013, the Bureau of Land Management sent Cliven 2 letters informing him that he had 45 days to remove his cattle from public land. They warned him to not physically interfere with the impoundment operation. Cliven didn't respond to the BLM. Instead, he spoke to the media. He said that he would do whatever it takes to protect his rights. He added that although he hasn't threatened to use a gun, he never said that he wouldn't either. For years, intelligence agents at the BLM and FBI quietly kept track of the Bundys, what the family said to the media, who they met with, and how much of a threat the family posed. Both agencies considered Cliven Bundy to be a moderate threat. The BLM wrote that Bundy's cause has been his lifeblood for over 2 decades. He seems to revel in being called the last rancher in Nevada. The BLM considered Cliven's threat to do whatever it takes more reactive than proactive. Cliven's savvy enough to understand that if he keeps his threats obtuse, he does not risk violating any criminal laws. They concluded that he's not likely planning any preemptive strike against our operation. For both the FBI and the BLM, Ryan Bundy was considered the most volatile threat within the Bundy inner circle. On March 17, 2014, 2 special agents with the BLM spoke to Ryan Bundy on the phone to let him know that they were prepared to remove the trespassing cattle.
We really want to know if we're going to have any type of physical problems with you guys, because we want to avoid that at all costs.
I'll tell you the best way to avoid that is to start the hearing to the Constitution, set the rights here that you are violating, and simply do not show up.
I have to be honest, and I have to inform you that that's not an option.
You can't back off. You can't draw a line in the sand and say, I'm only going to defend myself to this point, because when you do that, you lose.
10 days later, the BLM shut down over 600,000 acres of public land in an area known as Gold Butte. They believed that it would take 46 days to round up Cliven's herd. The BLM cattle seizure operation was dubbed Operation Gold Butte. The entire operation was estimated to cost $3 million. Nearly $1 million would go to a roundup firm that would supply the BLM with contract cowboys. $78,000 was paid to a firm in Utah to auction the seized cattle. The BLM's decision to auction Cliven's cattle in Utah quickly became a problem. Cliven's unbranded feral cattle were unvaccinated. County commissioners in Utah balked at the notion of bringing feral cattle across state lines where they could infect Utah herds. So they passed a resolution to keep Cliven's feral cattle out of the state. Operation Gold Butte was planned based on a military model called the ICS system. A vast BLM command post was built 7 miles away from Bundy Ranch. It was positioned next to Tokop Wash, a dried stream bed where the standoff between Bundy supporters and the feds would eventually take place.
They start to build this compound, and we see them putting it up. And then they shut down all the land. They make it where no one can go out on the land. And they put guards on every little teeny road. Anyone who stepped off the pavement, they were attacking.
83 armed BLM Rangers were deployed. Some BLM Rangers were responsible for protecting 19 contract cowboys. Contract cowboys would bait cattle into traps with the support of a low-flying helicopter. 29 FBI personnel were deployed with SWAT teams, snipers, and 2 hostage negotiators on standby. They also brought a mine-resistant armored protected vehicle, as well as 4 helicopters equipped with forward-looking infrared and high-elevation target support. In total, 213 personnel from multiple federal agencies were assigned to the operation. The BLM set up 24/7, 360-degree visual surveillance surrounding Cliven's home. Observation teams equipped with night vision goggles and scopes took up elevated positions around the ranch. The BLM set up surveillance cameras on a hill overlooking Cliven's home. One of those cameras was later destroyed by Ryan Bundy. When they were setting up cameras, they said that you came in the middle of the night and knocked them out?
No, that's not true. I did it in broad daylight.
Before Operation Gold Butte began, Cliven was desperate to get through to the one man he believed could put a stop to the BLM roundup, Clark County Sheriff Doug Gillespie. Sheriff Gillespie oversaw the 7th largest police department in the entire country, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, known as Metro. Because of that, Sheriff Gillespie had serious political sway, but not enough to stop federal agents backed up by a court order. Cliven told Gillespie that as sheriff of Clark County, Nevada, he was the highest law enforcement authority in the land. Cliven said he could simply tell the feds no and send them packing. When Sheriff Gillespie tried to explain to Cliven that that wasn't the case, he didn't listen. In an unusual move, he took Cliven to speak to 2 attorneys, but their advice also fell on deaf ears. Sheriff Gillespie later said he had little success in dealing with Cliven because he would not recognize the federal government.
I don't have no problem with the federal government. Who do I have a problem with? I have a problem with my county sheriff for not protecting my property. It's your job to protect my life, liberty, and property.
The sheriff could have put a stop to it at any time, because when it comes to law enforcement authority, there is no one else that has the law enforcement that the sheriff does. The feds don't have it.
Dan Love, the BLM special agent in charge of the Bundy roundup, didn't share Sheriff Gillespie's soft touch. Gillespie tried to convince Dan Love to conduct the roundup during fall instead of spring, which was calving season. He suggested that it would be inhumane to chase birthing cows with helicopters and ATVs under the hot sun. Dan Love brushed him off. The BLM felt that it was the perfect time for a roundup since Cliven's sons weren't at the ranch. Ryan Bundy was busy in Utah protesting the cattle auction firm, so there would be less of a risk of a confrontation. Initially, Sheriff Gillespie agreed to assist the BLM with Operation Gold Butte, but after talking to Dan Love, he changed his mind. Sensing danger, the sheriff pulled Metro Police out.
A cattle roundup is now underway.
With only 75 taken of the 500 cattle Bundy says he has, this is just the beginning.
And our battle's going to go on for months, so if they want a long, good, hard battle, we're ready.
What does that mean?
Well, whatever it takes, let's put it that way.
When the roundup began, there was only a small amount of interest from the public. Most of the protesters present were Bundy family members, friends, and ranchers. Initially, the only opposition the BLM faced occurred when they tried to get protesters to use the First Amendment areas.
Not the place to do it. If you feel like you want to express your First Amendment rights, we have a First Amendment area set up for you guys. We'll have to have you move over to the First Amendment area, okay? It's obvious that you guys are out here conducting surveillance. We don't want any trouble. We don't want any trouble with you guys, right? And I don't think you want any trouble with us.
I'm not wrong here, right? I'm not. I understand.
Ma'am, I understand that, but sometimes it's better just to move on than to ramp things up. If you want to go to your First Amendment area, then you're fine by going to the First Amendment area.
Free speech, though. This is where we're protesting?
You could save your comments until you're completely loaded into the cage. Okay, have fun, enjoy your right to free speech. The Armed Forces welcomes your dissent.
On April 6, 2014, Cliven's son Dave Bundy, a commercial pilot, pulled onto the shoulder of State Route 170 to film the BLM roundup on his iPad. 20 minutes later, he was joined by Ryan Bundy, who arrived in a white van with his children seated in the back. BLM agents told Dave Bundy to stop filming and to relocate to a First Amendment area. Dave Bundy argued that he was in his right to film since he was standing on the shoulder of a state highway. Moments later, BLM agents tackled him to the ground and arrested him.
The problem is they didn't have any authority to arrest.
No arrest authority is what this is?
They couldn't keep him because they didn't have any authority to arrest him to begin with. When that happened, in the meantime, I was over there by that other hill, and they put snipers up on the hill pointing down at me.
Ryan Bundy watched from his van while his brother was being cuffed.
I was greatly outnumbered. I knew they had a sniper on me. I didn't want to leave my brother, but what else was I to do? I mean, they had their finger on the trigger, so to speak.
Leave now, sir. Leave. We're not playing this game all day. Leave. Okay? Now. I'm gonna drag you out of the car, okay? Here in a second. Leave now.
The next day, Dave Bundy was let go. He was cited for failure to disperse and for resisting arrest. His charges were later dropped. Back at the ranch, Cliven was furious. He was mad that his son was arrested. He was mad that Sheriff Gillespie wasn't stepping in to stop the BLM. And he was mad that his cattle were being seized. Cliven knew that he needed a massive supporters to show up. With enough people, the BLM would fail. Cliven, a devout Mormon, learned through a personal revelation from God that over 200 people would turn up. He told his family to have plenty of rations ready to feed supporters. They were going to hold a rally. On April 6, 2014, Cliven's wife, Carol Bundy, wrote a plea for help on the Bundy Ranch blog. You've been asking what you can do. Now it's time. They have my cattle, and now they have one of my boys. Range war begins tomorrow at Bundy Ranch at 9:30 a.m. Bring your signs and horses and plan to stay as long as you can. We are going to get the job done.
It's a green light. I repeat, it is a go. We will be showing up in Nevada to support Cliven Bundy.
And an American rancher is being targeted and may soon be dead at the hands of the Obama administration.
On Twitter, Bundy supporters use hashtags such as Stop Bundy Siege and Range War, while his opponents label this a deranged war by a welfare rancher.
By noon, around 300 Bundy supporters poured in. Many of them weren't knowledgeable about public lands ranching, but they were unified by their disgust of the BLM's militaristic show of force. To Cliven supporters, the BLM were tyrannical feds staging a land grab and forcing an innocent man off of his private property. And it didn't matter that the BLM wasn't actually rounding cattle off of Cliven's private property. To his supporters, Cliven's fight was a fight for the future of the country. Federal regulators had gone after their religious beliefs, their guns, and their schools. To them, Cliven represented a traditional American lifestyle. He was a genuine icon of a bygone era that godless government bureaucrats were trying to erase.
Growing by day and night, with people from well beyond Nevada driving for hours to join in, bonding by campfires. They say they're fighting for something way bigger than cows.
Western United States citizens, ranchers, rural folks like this are the modern-day Indians. We're being driven off of our lands. We're being asked to, or forced into reservations known as cities.
As more Bundy supporters trickled in, so did Cliven's son, Ammon Bundy. Prior to the cattle roundup, the BLM and FBI considered Ammon to be the least threatening Bundy family member. But as Ammon told me on the phone, witnessing the BLM cattle seizure operation set his life trajectory way off course.
I had this perfect little life, making lots of money and really comfortable, and I show up at the Bundy Ranch and see a full assault in military style, and I see them, destroying my father's ranch, and I began to inquire more and more and realizing that the whole damn thing's corrupt.
On April 9th, someone witnessed a convoy of BLM vehicles escorting a dump truck hauling a backhoe.
There's only one reason why they would have a backhoe and a dump truck up there, and that is because they're cleaning up their mess from killing the animals.
Upon hearing that the BLM might be killing cattle and destroying water infrastructure, Ammon hopped onto an ATV to investigate. Before he got there, protesters on Riverside Road met with the BLM convoy as it was exiting a trail. This broke out into an altercation between protesters and the BLM. First, Cliven's sister Margaret Bundy Houston was tackled to the ground by a BLM agent. Following that, Ammon approached on an ATV. Then he tried to get a better look inside of the dump truck to see if it contained dead cattle. When BLM agents noticed what he was doing, they charged towards him, drawing tasers. As Ammon got closer, a German Shepherd leapt at his legs, so Ammon kicked the German Shepherd. Once again, the German Shepherd got close, and Ammon kicked it again. In retaliation, BLM agents tased Ammon Bundy 3 times, but remarkably, Ammon remained on his feet. It was at this moment that Ammon Bundy emerged as a leader in the Bundy movement.
Pull back, that's right, baby. That's right! BLM, go away! BLM, go away! Yes! 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 That's how we go! That's what I'm talking about! That's what I'm talking about! Yes!
You ever seen anyone else take 3 tasings and not go down?
Were you proud of?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hell, he's tough.
Yeah.
Who else is that tough?
As the video of Ammon's confrontation with the feds went viral, support for the Bundy skyrocketed. Over 2,000 people traveled from across the country to join the protest, including militia groups such as the Oath Keepers and the Idaho 3 Percenters. But among the militia groups, one man from Montana named Ryan Payne stood out.
My name's Ryan Payne. I'm an advisor and organizer for Operation Mutual Aid, a national organization of militia and patriotic citizens who have taken a pledge to stand between tyrants and the oppressed. And I've also been designated by Cliven Bundy as his representative to the militias.
I really like Ryan Payne. He's one of my favorite people, actually. He straightway drove clear down here from Montana to help support us in our time of need. And it was by his efforts that pretty much most of those militias showed up and helped us in 2014. And as far as those militias go, I believe that they saved our lives.
The citizens are the sovereign in America. The state is not the sovereign, the federal government is not the sovereign, the citizen is the sovereign. You can't trespass on the citizen.
As more militia members poured in, the atmosphere of the Bundy camp started to feel warlike.
Why the gun? Well, they have guns. We need guns to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government.
Restaurant owner Judy Metz says adding guns and militiamen could lead to lives lost.
That absolutely frightens me. Somebody does something or says something and these guys pull a gun, that's going to be that's going to be it.
Ryan Payne told the Bundys that they were in good hands. With his help, everybody would be safe, even the BLM. He told Cliven that by the end of this, the BLM would return his cattle and water infrastructure back to him. After that, Cliven was followed by a security detail wherever he went.
Rancher Cliven Bundy took the stage with what looked like his own secret service.
Ryan Payne appointed a tattoo artist from Arizona named Brian Buddha Cavalier as Cliven's personal bodyguard.
They're worried about assassination attempts, nutcakes coming on the property and trying to do harm to the women and children that are here on the property.
He says he's from Arizona, runs a fabrication business, and has security experience.
Buddha Cavalier claimed that he served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a scout sniper, but it was later revealed that he did not.
Brian Cavalier. He came here in 2014. He said he was in support, and he stayed here for quite a few months even after the refuge. More talk than action, and eventually he became an informant too, and he might have been an informant much longer than what we realize.
By April 10th, millions had learned of the Nevada rancher fighting against the feds. The BLM was losing the PR war on social media, where they were portrayed as land grabbers and as agents of Agenda 21. Fox News pundit Sean Hannity grabbed onto the Bundy story during the first days of the roundup and didn't let up. And you can probably guess the direction Hannity's spin on the story took.
You know, Margaret, that kind of thing.
I don't understand one thing. This is state property, right? This isn't federal land.
No federal land. This
so
is
it's state
Clark
property.
County state land.
And the desert tortoise is thriving, and the government's killing them because there's too many of them?
Pete Santilli, a former Marine who ran a political talk show on YouTube, decided that he would document the true story of what was transpiring.
If you're in Nevada and you can legally carry, get weapons out there, okay? We're gonna stand and fight in Clark County, Nevada. They will leave or else.
Armed with an iPad and a microphone, he set off for Bundy Ranch. When he got there, he pulled Dan Love aside for a chat, which he recorded.
If you choose to go face to face and people get hurt, we're going to hold you personally accountable.
And I will hold you legally accountable. And I guarantee you that the Constitution is on my side, not that side.
That's not a guarantee.
Oh, I guarantee you. So we're lawfully here. Look, you see all these signs? You're in a closed area. You're on federal land. You don't have to like it. It is the law.
It is not federal land.
It is federal land.
You think so?
I am positive.
I'll bet you lunch.
Mr. Santilli, if you were right, I wouldn't have a job. I've seen your numbers right now. You better hope the 10,000 show up.
Despite Dan Love's bravado, the arrival of heavily armed militia groups was exactly what the BLM had dreaded would happen. By then, over a dozen angry Bundy supporters had called in death threats to the hotel that BLM and contract cowboys were staying at.
The hotel received at least 9 threatening phone calls in April after they allowed BLM Rangers to stay in the hotel. Workers were told to kick out the BLM or they would not be standing in the morning. One Mesquite hotel worker who didn't want to go on camera said he was told by an anonymous militia member that he would be, quote, dragged out in the parking lot and shot.
That same day, Dan Love and his superiors attended a conference call with the Deputy Assistant Director of the FBI. The FBI stated that the armed militia gathering was unprecedented. The FBI recommended that the BLM extend an olive branch to the Bundys. They should come to an agreement before they made any attempt to retreat. Although Dan Love agreed to end the roundup, he refused to let go of the 377 cattle that the BLM had seized. Dan Love's ego wouldn't let him accept defeat. On April 12th, the Bundys held a rally. Coincidentally, the rally took place at the same time that the BLM put out a press release announcing that they would end the cattle roundup operation. Sheriff Gillespie attended the rally to tell the Bundys and their supporters that the BLM were pulling out. Gillespie wanted to discuss a compromise with Cliven in private, but Cliven told the sheriff that he'd only speak to him in front of the people. In Sheriff Gillespie's mind, he was there to share good news, which would surely ease tensions. Little did the sheriff know that Cliven had prepared a list of demands.
This is what we, the people, are asking this morning. Disarm the Park Service. Take your county bulldozers and tear down the entrance places. Why they ticket us. We want those arms delivered right here under these flags in 1 hour. 1 hour. And if they're not done, then we'll decide what we're going to do from this point on.
Do your job, Sheriff! Do your job!
What Cliven was demanding was impossible. Essentially, he was telling Sheriff Gillespie to go to war with the federal government on his behalf. Cliven gave the sheriff 1 hour to not only destroy federal infrastructure, but also to disarm the feds and to pile their weapons on the protest stage. Sheriff Gillespie had no intentions of doing what Cliven wanted. Instead, he drove straight to the BLM command post to speak to Dan Love. Sheriff Gillespie told Dan Love that the situation was dangerous and he should release Cliven's cattle. Dan Love wouldn't budge. Dan Love said that the cattle were federal property and what would happen to them would be his decision. Sheriff Gillespie wanted the situation to end peacefully, but the stubbornness of both Cliven Bundy and Dan Love made achieving peace seem impossible. Therefore, Gillespie drove to Las Vegas to speak to the governor, leaving Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo in charge. By 11:15 a.m., the 1-hour deadline that Cliven set for Sheriff Gillespie had passed. Cliven didn't see any stockpiling of federal weapons, and he didn't hear about toll booths being bulldozed down. So he directed his supporters to do the following.
Here, we're going to go up the freeway. We're going to block the freeway. These horse people are going to go up the Power Line Road, and they're going to meet us at the Toquap Bridge, underneath the Toquap Bridge. Get it going, cowboys. Let's go get it done.
Let's go! We gotta go through this gate and get over there. Free the cow! 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 Free the cow!
Soon, a mass of Bundy supporters traveled towards the BLM compound. There were 40 men riding on horseback down a dirt road through the backcountry. Others drove in their vehicles, causing a traffic jam on part of Interstate 15. Their destination was Toquap Wash, where the BLM command post was guarded by a temporary fence. Behind the fence was where the impounded cattle were being held. When the mob got closer, BLM agents positioned themselves, crouching behind white pickups. As the BLM reacted to the sudden torrent of Bundy supporters, so did the Las Vegas Metro Police. Soon, Nevada Highway Patrol, the National Park Service, and the FBI were also on the scene. There was a momentary standstill as protesters regrouped underneath the southbound I-15 bridge. This gave them time to kneel down and pray.
Amen.
Soon, the Bundy supporters on horseback joined Ammon Bundy and other protesters in the wash. They rode halfway between the I-15 bridges and formed a line of defense. Then, Ammon Bundy led supporters on foot towards the gate. Several protesters in the wash were unarmed women and children. At one point, someone said to put them in the front.
Well, what do you think about the children do you think the children should be down there right now?
Yeah, I do. I think it's fine.
Would you think that if one of them gets killed?
No, because that isn't our fault. That's not their parents'
but
fault.
it's clearly a dangerous situation. Would you admit that it's a dangerous situation?
Because the government has made it such. Yeah, you're right.
Later, a constitutional sheriff named Richard Mack took credit for the idea of women being positioned at the front.
We were actually strategizing to put all the women up at the front. If they're going to start shooting, it's going to be women that are going to be televised all across the world getting shot by these rogue federal officers.
We didn't put children up front. That's a lie.
Yeah?
That's a lie. There may have been a few children there, but that was a lie put forth by somebody, and that never took place.
Over the radio, Dan Love gave BLM agents permission to launch pepper spray into the crowd, but agents in the wash decided against it since it would be too dangerous. At least 200 protesters were in the wash, and even more were on top of both bridges. The BLM agents knew that they were fish in a barrel. One of the most notable photographs from that day was of a man named Eric Parker laid prone on the highway and pointing his Sega 223. There were several other protesters positioned like Parker was on the bridge. Although the BLM had snipers on top of mesas above, it was clear that if a car backfired, the situation would erupt into a bloodbath.
These people who were here, they're not under our direction. We're not telling them what to do. And yes, there were several of them who stood up and were pointing rifles back, which was the best thing that could have happened. Because the BLM knew they're not going to just get away with any old crap now.
While all of this transpired, Cliven Bundy, the man who the entire situation was about, was not present. Cliven was heading towards a bulldozer to run over National Park Service toll booths. Cliven fired up the bulldozer and drove it, but then it stalled. Unsure of what to do, he prayed, and God spoke to him.
This is not your job, this is their job.
God's words convinced Cliven to leave the fight to his supporters.
Would you say that God was on your side?
Absolutely. There was no question. I mean, the Spirit of the Lord was here so strong that day. You ask anybody that was here, they will tell you how spiritual and special it was. It was a very special feeling. I was seeking guidance. And because I was seeking guidance, in direction of what do we do? What do we do? How do we contend against this? Mm-hmm. And so yes, I fasted to gain spiritual knowledge and understanding of what to do. Mm-hmm. I fasted for 4 days. And at the end of that 4th day, yes, I received some inspiration. Mm-hmm. And I received inspiration to know what was going to happen. This was like on Tuesday. I knew what was going to happen Saturday. I seen it all in my head, so to speak. I knew what was going to take place. I knew where it was going to take place, and I knew what the outcome was going to be.
During the standoff, Ryan Bundy spoke to Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo. Ryan wanted him to put a stop to the tense situation. People would die, he said. The Assistant Sheriff agreed. Lombardo knew that the only way things would end peacefully was if Dan Love released the cattle.
Shuttling back and forth between the Bundy forces and BLM was Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who'd been left in charge by Sheriff Doug Gillespie.
The bottom line is bloodshed over cattle, unacceptable. Nobody wanted to go that direction.
And it was the sheriff, or at least the undersheriff at the time, that did finally bring a stop to the roundup by the BLM.
Assistant Sheriff Joe Lombardo did tell Dan Love to release the cattle. To Ryan Bundy, it was a clear example of a county sheriff assuming his role as the preeminent law authority in the land. However, that wasn't actually what occurred. Before Lombardo told Dan Love to release the cattle, BLM Acting Deputy Director Steve Ellis had already given the order for BLM personnel to retreat. So it wasn't a county sheriff who ended the standoff, it was the feds. And with that, the Bundys had won.
Hey, listen. You are on Nevada State property. Okay, there's a time for you. No, there's a time for us now. We're doing that. No, the time you need to push these people back so they can do the same thing. Push them back so they can do the same thing.
Hammond cut down a closed area sign on the gate, and Ryan yelled,
"The West has now been won!"
Bundy supporters on horseback rode to the BLM's corrals to release the cattle. As the cattle made their way through Tokop Wash, Bundy supporters were instructed to stay absolutely silent so as to not spook them.
I am so happy I get to open the gates. I get to open the gates and let our babies out, our calves. They get to go back home. They get to go home to the river.
We just took one hill. We're going to take Capitol Hill next.
And to see those people with the feds with their guns trained on them saying, we will shoot you, keeping their guns at their side and marching saying, go ahead and shoot us. And when it does, we're going to shoot back, but only after you pull the trigger first. It was literally Lexington and Concord Part 2, but the globalists backed off this time. And let me tell you something, they backed off because they're smart and they know humanity's got the power. And they know in the breast of every man, woman, and child out there beats that idea of liberty. It is such a small cadre of evil people that want to control our civilization.
The standoff lasted around 3 hours. Remarkably, the Bundys led their supporters to the gates of the BLM compound to get their cattle back without a single person being arrested or being killed. I wanted to understand how the BLM screwed up so badly and why the Bundys got away with what they did. But the BLM wouldn't talk to me, so I spoke to Richard Spots, an ex-BLM employee, instead.
Much of the Bundy nonsense could have been averted if BLM had been paying attention. One of my great frustrations, among many, working at BLM, was how BLM ignored the history of how it successfully handled a chronic trespass grazing situation with the Klump family in the 1990s leading up to about 2004.
Wally Klump was a rancher from Arizona who refused to remove his cattle from BLM land. Just like Cliven Bundy, Klump's bitter war with the BLM went on for decades. Wally Klump lost in court several times. The BLM seized his cattle, they revoked his grazing permit, and they took away his water rights. After threatening to kill government officials, Wally Klump continued to defy a court order to remove his cattle from BLM land. As a result, he was thrown in jail. But the judge overseeing his case did something unusual. He told Wally that he would be detained until he agreed to remove his trespassing cattle from federal land. The months went by. Wally turned 70 in federal detention as his family continued to operate his ranch. But after 388 days in Central Arizona Detention Center, Wally Clump finally removed his cattle from federal land and returned home. And he never trespassed on federal land with his cattle again.
In the Clump situation, BLM did 3 key things in how they went about it. The judge was asked to issue a bench warrant where U.S. Marshals did arrest Mr. Clump and put him in jail, where he stayed for, I think, a little over 1 year before he and his family relented and agreed to remove the trespass livestock. The second tool was that they got a civil judgment for the past due grazing fees and fines for trespass. And when there was failure to pay, then they could place liens on the real and personal property of the Clump family. The third thing that BLM did was they had successful clandestine roundups where they could incrementally go out and just round up some of the trespass cattle when no one from the Clump family was around and kind of chip away at the trespass herd that way. And BLM didn't learn from that for a whole decade, and you had the Bunkerville standoff in 2014. I believe that if BLM management was competent and paid attention and had used the tools to resolve the Clump trespass in resolving the Bundy trespass, the Bunkerville standoff need never have happened. And the Bunkerville standoff, in my opinion, was seen as such a profound victory by the sovereign citizens and the other militia groups that supported Bundy, that 2 years later, they occupied the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. And so it's clear that the rule of law and democracy is under siege from 2 sides. It's under siege from the people like the Bundys and Clumps that believe that they're above the law and they can do whatever they want and that public lands can really be treated like they're private ranches. And the other being the incompetent, corrupt, cowardly federal officials who let that happen. And when there's no adverse consequences for illegal behavior, you embolden the lawbreakers.
After the feds retreated from Tocop Wash, Patriot circles lauded Bunkerville as the freest place in the country. Thousands flocked to Bundy Ranch to enjoy music and dancing. One couple even got married there.
The groom dressed in camouflage, the guests had guns, and the bride, she wore white.
He's the love of my life. He's a man. He's a patriot. He loves his country. He's out here willing to die for his country if he had to.
Alex Benecke's been guarding the ranch of Cliven Bundy. He went back to New Hampshire for Ashley, and they decided to tie the knot at this base camp in Bunkerville.
I want this as much as I want our country. She's one of a kind.
But the Bundys knew the war was not over.
So these people who hold themselves out to be patriots are not. They're nothing more than domestic terrorists.
Rumors spread that Cliven would be targeted by a drone strike or another raid. So protected by his paramilitary army, Cliven maintained a defensive position. His security detail, led by Buddha Cavalier, continued to follow him wherever he went. Ryan Payne assigned teams to patrol State Route 170 to question drivers who they found suspicious. They performed combat training drills in the desert backcountry. Then Cliven Bundy said something that made the news and shocked many, many people.
I want to tell you one more thing I know about the Negro. Now, are they better off as slaves picking cotton, or are they better off under government subsidy?
Right, allow me to make myself abundantly clear. I believe those comments are downright racist, they are repugnant, they are bigoted, and it's beyond disturbing.
After asking forgiveness, Cliven Bundy maintains he is not a racist. Possibly to make good on those words, Ryan Bundy ran up to shake the hand of the only African American to turn up to their barbecue.
Later, the Bundys attempted to do damage control by posing for photographs with black people who they invited to the ranch.
PX, hold off on that. He may be at the location.
Cliven's militia hunkered down on a pocket of land that they named Camp Liberty. But nothing lasts forever, and time slowly chipped away at the ranks of Cliven's paramilitary army. Some left because of their families or job obligations. Others because of drama between Ryan Payne's militia and the Oath Keepers, a beef that could be summed up as a lot of accusations about each other being feds.
This is a new issue. Buddha, myself, and Jerry have been asked by a Stuart Rhodes lovemaking crew that came onto me very strongly last night, and I had, well, anyway, there's women here, so I'm not going to go into it. I was, yeah, you guys.
There were no Reaper drones deploying Hellfire missiles on Bundy Ranch. The only struggle that Patriots at Camp Liberty faced came from trying to endure the Mojave Desert's intense daytime summer heat and below freezing temperatures at night. So one by one, the militants left. The Bundy standoff had breathed life into the militia movement, but there were more exciting things going on in the domestic fight for America. Militia rallies at the US-Mexico border, a clash with the BLM at Sugar Pine Mine, an ATV protest at Recapture Canyon. Eventually, the only Patriot who remained at Bundy Ranch was Cliven's bodyguard, Buddha Cavalier, who stuck around attending to Cliven's every personal need for the next year and a half. During that time, he became a Mormon, and Cliven was the one who baptized him.
This is the Glenn Beck Program, the Blaze Radio Network.
I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves? End quote, Cliven Bundy last week. Just that shows you how unhinged from reality this guy is. You were paying grazing fees, and I have cattle. There is national land behind my ranch, and I know if anybody runs cattle on that, they also have to pay for grazing fees. So grazing fees are normal.
I have no contract. I do not graze my cattle on the United States property, and I would pay my grazing fee to the proper farm.
But wait a minute, hang on just a second. Cliven, you do graze it in the Nevada state constitution. In the constitution of your state, that land was given to the federal government.
In the days following the Bureau of Land Management's retreat, conservative pundit Glenn Beck took to the airwaves to lambaste Cliven Bundy. Unlike the liberal elites criticizing Cliven on CNN, Glenn Beck was a member of the LDS Church and was a rancher himself. So a micro-battle between people who on the surface seemed to be members of the same team began to stew.
Hello everyone, my name is Lavoy Finicum. I'm a neighboring rancher to Cliven Bundy on the Arizona side of the border.
Here's Lavoy, and at this moment, Lavoy's torn. Not only was he a great fan of Glenn Beck, but he had also been at the standoff to support Cliven Bundy. Lavoy Finicum was a Mormon public lands rancher who was one of the cowboys on horseback during the Bundy standoff.
I'm a neighboring rancher to Cliven Bundy on the Arizona side of the border, and I feel I'd like to make this video to maybe offset some very powerful voices such as Glenn Beck, where I believe that we've been misrepresented.
My husband was upset about that, and I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 days after he'd been home from the stand, but Glenn was on the television talking, and he says, that makes me so mad. He says, I'm gonna call Glenn back. And I'm going, right. You're gonna call Glenn back. Okay, whatever.
Hello, Lavoy.
Hello, Glenn. How are you?
I'm very good, sir.
I was there. I rode all day with the Bundy boys. And I hope I can say just a few words, Glenn,
sure,
that might soften your heart. We weren't there to cause a fight and to get anybody killed. We knew that if we didn't ride up there with the intent that we were coming to get our cows, even at the cost of our lives, that we were going to stand for our personal property rights. And then when federal agents finally pulled back, we said, boys, do not be flipping the birds. Do not be catcalling at those federal agents.
The difference is you were willing to be shot and lose your life for what you believed in, but you were not willing to shoot.
No.
Right. There's the huge difference. There is nothing to be gained. And Lavoy, you know this. You just reflected this, and I thank you for your call. It doesn't mean you don't stand your ground. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks
definitely
stood their ground. It's how you stand your ground that makes all of the difference in the world.
He tried to tell Glenn his side of it. And as he was telling me, he got a few sentences out, but then the interview was over and it was done. It was quick and over with. And after the Bundy thing, that's when he said, I don't care to listen to Glenn anymore. He's too close-minded.
So I have strong feelings about that, about how we were misrepresented by powerful voices. Nobody could have hurt us more than you, Glenn Beck. You owe them an apology.
After the Bundys won their battle against the BLM, Lavoy returned home. Life went back to normal. He and his wife Jeanette looked after foster children. It was their main gig. Ranching alone didn't pay the bills, but being a rancher was Lavoy's dream.
Everything I have is tied up into this. My home, my life. I spent my lifetime trying to obtain a ranch. I loved as a young boy riding with my dad, chasing some cows on the weekend and stuff. And I always wanted to raise my family out here.
Lavoie followed the rules all of his life. He was clean cut, didn't smoke or drink, never even got a speeding ticket. However, witnessing the Bundy standoff left a profound impression on his psyche, the likes of which he couldn't shake.
He wasn't actively engaged in politics in any way until the BLM Bundy thing came up. He was searching for answers because he wanted to understand. Then he kept going to see Ryan and talk to Ryan.
I got to know Lavoie more and more. He also had a ranch. He had studied the constitutional, rights and the land ownership issues and came to a realization that what we were telling him was true.
The more Lavoie learned, the more he sought out ways to teach others. He started uploading YouTube videos about the Constitution, property rights, and a guide to prepping for the collapse. Soon, Lavoie became more vocal about the Bureau of Land Management in his YouTube videos. One day he appeared irate, claiming that the BLM was stealing his water.
There's been a few fires here in the area. The BLM came in here, set up a tank, and they drained it to use for their own fires to put them out without so much as a hidey-ho or to please or we're going to use it. They just set up and they took it. They stole it.
Then in August 2015, Lavoie Finicum decided to follow in Cliven Bundy's footsteps and cancel his grazing permit.
So what I've done, I sent a letter to the BLM saying thank you so much for your help in managing my ranch, but I shall no longer need your help. I shall manage it myself. And I'm telling the BLM right now, I'm saying to you, this isn't yours, it's mine. Leave me alone.
He had conviction, and I respect him for that. I know that he was not going into any of this ignorantly. He understood the choice that he made by standing up. He knew that it could put a target on our backs.
As Lavoie became more vocal, he started to attract attention from the FBI.
We started to receive calls from other ranchers. Why is the FBI out asking us questions out on our ranch? Why are they stopping my trucks? We had drones flying over our house. So he calls a friend that we met selling his book and says, hey, I know you've dealt with security before. Do you think you could come and talk to me about how I can, keep my ranch safe? One of the gentlemen was a militia member from Utah, and he had FBI infiltrate his group, and he brought 2 FBI agents with him. And we find out through the Bundy trial that our house was bugged. I fed him burritos.
Around this time, the FBI was also running a separate investigation on the Bundys. Posing as a documentary crew, the FBI approached the Bundys and asked them to participate in a film called American Reloaded.
Longbow Productions is what they called themselves. I was kind of suspicious of them from the get-go. They had a hotel room rented in Las Vegas, so we went up to their room one at a time, and they would go down through a line of questioning, kind of like what you're doing here, trying to get, supposedly an understanding of what's going on, but it wasn't real. It was all fake. It was basically FBI agents who were posing as a film crew and trying to get confessions, I guess. They were asking questions about guns. They were asking questions about, would you kill a federal officer, different things like that. When they started asking questions that I felt were inappropriate, then I just stopped answering. Problem is, they were offering alcohol, they were offering payment. Of course, I don't drink alcohol, so that didn't influence me, but, one of the fellows who was here that day accepted their alcohol and then got loose with his tongue and said things that he shouldn't have said, and he was convicted not because of what he did, because he didn't do anything different than anyone else did, but he got convicted because of what he said.
What would the response have been had the federal government come back then?
Dead bodies. No matter if we're up at the Bundy Ranch or if we're out in the southern deserts. If it comes into our perimeter, if it's not a friendly, it dies.
Hello everyone, this is Lavoie Finicum. I think I'm pretty upset this evening.
One day Lavoie uploaded a video where he appeared agitated.
But I've been following what's happening over in Bend, Oregon with that ranching family over there, the Hammond family. And I'm pretty upset with what the BLM has done to them. Actually, I'm really angry.
In the video, he spoke about a pair of cattle ranchers named Dwight and Stephen Hammond, who he believed were being railroaded by the feds.
They had a prescribed burn that was allowed, got off onto 100 acres, burned 100 acres of BLM. They threw him in jail, and now it looks like they're facing 5 more years in prison. But dadgummit, it's got to stop.
Dwight and Stephen Hammond were father and son ranchers from eastern Oregon who were charged with arson after sparking 2 controlled burns on federal land. The Hammonds said that they set the first fire to clear out invasive plant species, and the second to ward off a wildfire which threatened to destroy their winter feed. Federal prosecutors disagreed. They said that the Hammonds were covering up evidence of poaching and had put the lives of federal firefighters in danger. They served a year in prison and returned home, but they were once again sent back to prison after prosecutors successfully argued that they were required to serve out 5 years according to mandatory minimum sentencing laws. The Hammonds Ranch was surrounded by the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, a vitally important pit stop for millions of migratory birds traveling along the Pacific Flyway. The nearly 190,000-acre refuge was created by President Roosevelt in 1908 in order to protect birds from the plume hat trade. Since the early 1990s, the refuge has been the stage of a battle between the Hammonds and the Fish and Wildlife Service.
The conflict is over the use of federal land, including the spectacular Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, which almost surrounds the Hammond property.
2/3 the way up on that mountain where you see the snow, that's where our cattle are at. We have to cross the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ground to get there.
When the Fish and Wildlife Service canceled the Hammonds' grazing permit, the Hammonds argued that they had ancestral rights to the forage and water on the land since 1871. They also said that they were willing to die fighting the feds for their rights. Sounds familiar?
The cancellation provoked a confrontation.
It was going to get nasty immediately.
The Hammonds placed this piece of farm equipment in the way of a new fence the government was building.
And when they said that they were going to arrest me if I didn't move, I said, well, arrest me.
Hammond was arrested, handcuffed, and taken away. He and his son Steve now face federal criminal charges for their actions that day.
Enter Chuck Cushman, one of the leaders of the Wise Use movement.
You want to know who's running the government? It's the environmental groups.
Chuck Cushman is one of the key players in a new movement called Wise Use. Its goal to protect individual landowners from excessive government regulation and environmental extremism.
You'll come into these rural towns where you do have a lot of economic and social stress. Cushman comes in and puts a target on environmentalists and puts a target on Forest Service workers and says, that's your enemy.
When Cushman heard about the Hammond story, he rallied together 500 protesters to bombard the Fish and Wildlife Service with phone calls.
I put signs up on the wall with the names of each of the officers that were involved. It was called the Wall of Shame.
And Cushman handed out a flyer that had the home phone numbers of the Fish and Wildlife Service employees.
A lot of them left immediately, got on the phone and started using those numbers and calling and threatening people on that list.
Afterwards, the Hammonds' troubles with the law disappeared. 21 years later, the Hammonds were set to return to prison, and the Bundys wanted to stop that from happening, just like Chuck Cushman did in 1994. It was Cliven's son, Ammon Bundy, who was tased by the BLM 3 times during 2014, that decided to do something to help the Hammonds.
This urge, this overwhelming urge came upon me to find out about the Hammonds, and I could not sleep, so I studied all through the night. I read every article I could read. I read part of the court proceedings and everything I could get my hands on.
Ammon Bundy learned that the Hammonds lived in Harney County, Oregon, a place where cattle outnumbered locals 14-1, and 70% of the land was owned by the federal government. In the 1970s, when Harney County's economy was centered on its logging industry, it was one of the wealthier counties in Oregon. These days, it's one of the poorest. In the 1920s, the Hines Lumber Company struck a deal with the federal government, giving the company access to acres of old-growth ponderosa pine trees in the Malheur National Forest. Over the next 50 years, Hines Lumber stripped the forests of centuries-old trees until there were hardly any left. In the 1990s, new environmental regulations to protect Malheur National Forest forced the company to shut down. With that, Harney County's economy plummeted and never recovered. After the lumber mill shut down, most people in Harney County either worked for the government, lived on public assistance, or ranched cattle like Dwight and Stephen Hammond. To Ammon Bundy, the stories of Harney County and the Hammonds perfectly represented a cause to throw his family's name behind. Ammon had a grand nation-changing vision of what he could accomplish in Harney County. He envisioned a movement that would spread across the western United States of ranchers, miners, and loggers seizing control of public lands from the federal government. Ammon said that 3 angels paid him a visit in the middle of the night to tell him what to do. First, shield the Hammonds from returning to federal prison with the help of a well-armed militia. Second, get the Harney County Sheriff to tell the feds to go home. Third, inspire the people of Harney County, and by extension the rest of the western United States, to seize land back from the feds, restoring Harney County's industries to their glory days. Unfortunately for Ammon, when he visited Dwight and Stephen Hammond, they rejected his help and told him that they planned to return to prison in hopes of receiving a presidential pardon. Despite trying, Ammon couldn't get the Hammonds to accept his help, so next he went to visit the Harney County Sheriff, Dave Ward. Sheriff Ward knew about the Bundys and said that Ammon's visit worried him. His worries were confirmed when Ammon began to tell him that as county sheriff, he was the highest legal authority of the land, and it was his duty to stop federal marshals from taking the Hammonds back to prison. Sheriff Ward, like most people in Harney County, didn't think what was happening to the Hammonds was right. But Ammon's talk of constitutional sheriffs and county supremacy didn't sit right with him. A couple weeks later, Ammon returned to Sheriff Ward's office with Ryan Payne, who helped gather the militia during the 2014 standoff. Ryan Payne warned the sheriff that if he didn't shield the Hammonds from returning to prison, thousands of people would come do his job for him. Before they left, they warned him that unless he did what they wanted, his inaction could cause civil unrest and perhaps bloodshed. Following the visit, Ammon directed his supporters to bombard Sheriff Ward's office with thousands of phone calls, emails, and letters, many of them death threats. During the final months of 2015, over 45 Bundy supporters poured into Harney County's largest city, Burns. One was named John Ritzheimer, a volatile former Marine who made this video which he addressed to his children.
Your daddy swore an oath. He swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's why he couldn't be with you on Christmas.
Some Harney County residents put up Go Home Bundy signs. Locals started to refer to the Bundys and the militia as the outsiders.
I don't necessarily disagree with what you guys are doing. It's the manner in which you're doing it and the attitude in which you come to the community. I don't think you guys give one rat shit about the Hammonds. I think you're here.
You know what? You're right. I don't care about the Hammonds. I care about Harney County and America.
No,
Yes, I do.
You're here to pump your own agenda, buddy.
Okay, so just really quickly.
Most people in the county didn't like the feds and were enraged by the government's treatment of the Hammonds. But they also didn't like Ammon Bundy coming into their community and stirring things up. Without support from the citizens of Harney County, Ammon Bundy knew that he had nothing. Militia groups in town made it clear to him that they wouldn't do anything risky unless the Hammonds or the people of Harney County wanted them to come to their aid. So Ammon decided to organize a community meeting of around 22 locals.
I mean, I'm not going to dance around what we're talking about here. We're talking about removing these unconstitutional agencies from Harney County. But the people have to, you have to exhibit enough organization to form these committees of safety so that you can charge and be in charge of the militia.
Prior to the Revolutionary War, that's what was formed, was a Committee of Safety. And a Committee of Safety is just that. It's a committee to help provide for the safety and the security of the people, especially when the government isn't doing it.
7 people were elected to the Committee of Safety: a fire chief, some ranchers, and an accountant. The fire chief said that he felt pushed too hard by Ammon Bundy. One of the ranchers said that they weren't interested in taking up arms and overthrowing the government. On January 2nd, 2016, around 300 people attended a rally organized in support of the Hammonds, who were set to return to prison in 2 days. Protesters made their way through the largest city in Harney County, Burns. Then they delivered flowers to the Hammonds' home and threw pennies at the sheriff's office to symbolize that he sold out to the feds. Before the rally started, Ammon Bundy invited his closest supporters to meet in the back room of a local restaurant. There, he told them of his plans, which were to seize the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Lavoy Finicum, Ryan Bundy, Ryan Payne, Buddha Cavalier, and other familiar faces agreed to follow him to the refuge. Eric Parker, dubbed the Bundy Sniper during the 2014 standoff, was the only one who did not.
For those that understand that they came to make a hard stand, those that know what's going on here and have seen it for many, 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 many years, those who are ready to actually do something about it, I'm asking you to follow me and go to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, and we're going to make a hard stand.
When Ammon Bundy announced the plan to take over the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, he wasn't talking about the whole thing. He meant the refuge headquarters, 13 buildings in a lookout tower tucked against a giant marsh. Ammon chose the refuge headquarters because it was the most ideal place in Harney County to stage an armed uprising. It was isolated and around 32 minutes south of the nearest city, Burns. It was also well defended. A wildfire watchtower loomed over the only road leading in. It was cozy with its bunk beds, kitchen, and air conditioning. If need be, Ammon believed that they could remain living there for as long as it would take for them to claim it through squatters' rights. Usually, Malheur was occupied by employees of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but they were told to stay home indefinitely by their supervisor during the holidays. Days before, Ryan Payne had showed up at the refuge to check it out. Someone recognized Payne, putting the refuge's employees on high alert. Ammon described his decision to take over the refuge as a hard stand, a last-ditch effort to have their political message taken seriously. When Ammon led a convoy of around 20 men in vehicles to the wildlife refuge, they were expecting a shootout. Instead, they were able to take it without any resistance, saying that they found a set of keys which gave them access to all of the buildings on the compound.
It was completely unoccupied. We never kicked anybody out. We never saw anybody. We never spoke to anybody. We just simply went there and we did take it over. We did.
We have taken over the refuge. We have made a hard stand. We have done this because this refuge has been a tool that has been used to destroy ranchers, destroy loggers, and to oppress the people here in Harney County.
We'll uphold the Constitution. We'll return these resources to the people. It belongs to the people of Harney County, these good folk. And so I'll stand here with my friends.
There's already people here from all walks of life. I don't know the first thing about ranching. I'm a city boy myself. 11 years in the Marine Corps. Now I'm serving my country.
Ammon's impulsive decision to occupy the wildlife refuge alienated almost everyone other than the 20 or so men who helped him do it.
You've got a situation where you've got people who don't want this, and you've got outsiders trying to force it on them. So I think we need to stay out of it. If it's only a matter of peaceful protest, of course, that'd be fine. That's righteous and good to go. But you cannot go there and force a confrontation with rifles in hand when the family does not want the assistance. So I think Oath Keepers need to stay the hell out of it.
The Hammonds condemned the occupation and said that the Bundys didn't speak for them. 2 days later, they voluntarily returned to federal prison. The Mormon Church put out a statement criticizing the occupiers, and so did Ted Cruz. The Oregon Three Percenters put out an article called Oregon Standoff, Federal Provocateurs, Sociopaths, and Idiots. The Committee of Safety, aka the shadow government Ammon set up with Harney County locals, also condemned the occupation. Even Cliven Bundy said that he didn't, quote, quite understand how much they were going to accomplish. I think of it this way. What business does the Bundy family have in Harney County, Oregon? The occupiers were completely unprepared. They called for more Patriots to join them.
We need you to get here and stand with us. Whether you're armed or unarmed, you get up here.
Pete Santilli kept saying that 10,000 Patriots would show up, even though there were only around 20 people staying at the wildlife refuge. Santilli stayed at a nearby motel and said on his YouTube show that he wanted to keep himself at a distance because he thought that the occupation was illegal. The occupation of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was nothing like the Bundy standoff of 2014. Cliven's battle against the BLM inspired people because they saw him as an underdog fighting for his livelihood and heritage against corrupt feds. The Malheur occupation, on the other hand, was simply perplexing. A bunch of guys with guns rolled into a county that didn't want them there, to support ranchers who rejected their help, and they took over a federal compound in a way that optically hurt their cause. So much so that Patriot circles entertained the thought that the occupiers were feds engaging in a false flag operation. As one of the founders of the Three Percenter movement wrote, when Obama meets his attorney general on the subject of citizen disarmament, you can bet the farm that this will play right into that narrative. Perfect timing. You gotta give the federal handlers of these pukes credit. This is precisely the sort of offensive action on the part of these militia terrorists that they needed. Regardless, Ammon remained steadfast. He believed that eventually, people would come to understand and support the occupation. At a press conference held in front of the refuge, they announced that the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge was no more, and that from then on, it was called the Harney County Resource Center. They also announced the name of their group, Citizens for Constitutional Freedom.
We intend on going to work and assisting the people of Harney County in claiming their rights, using their rights as free people.
Ammon said that they were prepared to stay at the refuge for years, or for however long it would take to see their goals fulfilled. They let it be known that they were willing to kill or be killed if law enforcement attempted a raid. However, they called it a peaceful protest nevertheless. They said that they carried guns because their Second Amendment right defended their First Amendment right.
Federal officials tell us they are developing a plan to end the standoff situation at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge.
Resolve what? A bunch of people at a camp? We're camping out, we're hanging out.
I shared law enforcement's stated intentions with some members of the armed group tonight as they stood watch at the entrance to the refuge. Their reaction?
The FBI are terrorists. They're terrorists.
So you don't think they'll negotiate?
FBI are bad guys. They're not good guys.
There are no law enforcement checkpoints outside of the refuge, or even on the road leading in. Burns, a small city that was a 30-minute drive from the refuge, was turned into a logistics camp for law enforcement officers representing 3 levels of government. State police built a staging area in the school district's administration building. The FBI set up a command post at Burns Municipal Airport. When they received intel that occupiers might try and storm the courthouse, they fenced it off and posted armed guards in front of it to protect it. Occupiers were allowed to come and go as they pleased. Ammon Bundy got his hair cut in town. On 3 occasions, he drove home to Idaho to see his wife and kids. People visited, bringing along supplies and food. Some Harney County locals were curious about what the Bundys had to say and stuck around to receive lessons on the Constitution. An occupier named Dwayne held an American flag and rode around on his horse in front of the refuge. Motels in Burns filled up with militia guys and journalists. Businesses experienced a spike in revenue.
If you didn't know any better, you'd think Ammon Bundy was just another local resident. We even spotted him just hanging out with his fellow militiamen at a nearby restaurant. Many are wondering why the feds don't just arrest him already when he's presumably unarmed and vulnerable in the city.
Rather than going in guns blazing, law enforcement opted to maintain a hands-off approach. Let the occupation fizzle out. There was no need to repeat the mistakes at the 2014 Bundy Ranch standoff. Instead, the FBI sent in several informants to spy on what the occupiers were doing and saying. They kept track of the occupiers' movements through cellular ping information. They flew drones over the refuge and set up surveillance cameras to collect license plates. Some cameras were taken down by the occupiers.
Does that look like you? Surveillance cameras? Look at that. With no network! There's the cameras. This is United States federal government surveillance! Woo! Let freedom ring! You take this MAC address, you're gonna find it's Department of Homeland Security, or the FBI, or some entity as such, in your community mounting surveillance cameras without your knowledge.
Although the FBI were in charge of law enforcement efforts against the occupation, they didn't talk to the media, and they rarely spoke to the occupiers. One of the only times that they did was when Ryan Bundy sat next to a few FBI agents at church. The FBI recruits heavily from Mormon communities, since Mormons often live clean lifestyles and are bilingual due to their missionary work. While the FBI remained quietly behind the scenes, it was Sheriff Dave Ward who became the face of law enforcement. Unlike Sheriff Gillespie in Clark County, Nevada, Dave Ward wasn't used to navigating a media circus. With only a single lieutenant and 3 officers under his command, he was used to dealing with petty crime, drunks, and domestic disputes. When he spoke to the cameras, he was doe-eyed, soft-spoken, and sometimes sounded like he was on the verge of tears. But despite his soft nature, he felt a duty to see the situation come to a peaceful resolution.
Good afternoon, I'm Sheriff Dave Ward. Apologize, I've been feeling a little emotional today. I'm proud of this community. I'm proud of my friends and neighbors. I'm proud of the way that you stood up to this stuff.
5 days into the occupation, Sheriff Ward ignored the wishes of the FBI and met with Ammon Bundy and Ryan Payne and offered them a safe escort out of the state, which they rejected.
It only takes one unstable person to show up, and we know that.
That could happen even if we laughed.
But I'm here to offer safe escort out. Go back, kick it around with your folks, and I'll give you a call tomorrow and ask you what you decided.
I do.
Thanks for coming out.
Will you consider the convoy a safe escort out of the state?
I'm not afraid to go out of the state. I don't need an escort.
We're talking about Dave Ward here, biggest coward in the country. Okay, he sold out to the feds. We had plenty of discussions with him, talking to him about the situation, trying to get him to realize the atrocities that's going on here and help him to stand up for the Hammonds. He caved to the pressures of the federal government, which have no authority over him. He's a coward, and he should have never been in that position as sheriff.
When Ryan Bundy told the media that they would leave if people of Harney County asked them to, Sheriff Ward held a community meeting and asked the nearly 400 locals in attendance,
how many citizens of Harney County do we have in here? Now I'm going to ask for the same show of hands of how many people want to work this out peacefully and would like these folks to go home. God bless you, Harney County.
There were around 7,200 people living in Harney County at the time, and nearly 28% of them worked for the government. Also, while there were plenty of cattle ranchers, sentiment towards the federal land agencies was relatively positive compared to most rural Western communities.
The community, including the ranchers, worked really hard to come up with this thing called the Malheur Comprehensive Conservation Plan, which is about, the policies for land management. I said, how did you reconcile your argument that things were so bad that the ranchers needed to overthrow the federal government when they had just spent 8 years coming up with this collaborative agreement? How did the Malheur Comprehensive Conservation Plan fit into your view about the federal tyranny and oppression at the wildlife refuge? Because that's not the way the ranching community seemed to see it. And he said, oh, well, I never heard about that. It's like the main policy, set of policies that guides the management of the wildlife refuge. So you're saying you had an armed revolution against the federal government to overthrow federal land use policy, but you have no idea what the federal land use policy is?
It was because of moments like these that Lavoy Finicum, the only cattle rancher amongst the occupiers, became the go-to spokesman for the group. He reached out to the Burns Paiute tribe and asked them to join the occupation. He explained that he grew up on a Navajo reservation and understood their concerns. When the tribe said that the occupiers were desecrating their ancestral land, Lavoy offered to return their ancient artifacts stored in the refuge.
BLM or whoever was in charge of these native artifacts just kind of boxed them up and let them just rot down here.
Yes. Why are they locked away here for nobody but for them to look at whenever they come down here? This needs to be taken care of, and so we're reaching out to the Paiute people in as sincere a manner as I can. Please, let's open up a dialogue. Come get a representative. Come here and let's start talking face to face, and let's make sure that we take care of the heritage of the Native American people.
We spoke with Tribal Chair Charlotte Rodrigue. She says through their tribal archaeologist, they already understood how many artifacts were there and how they were stored.
It doesn't really bother me.
As for the condition of the items, she pointed out that Eastern Oregon is high and dry, meaning the climate won't impact what was shown in those boxes.
The things that we're worried about are the things that are defenseless. The animals, the plants, all the archaeology and the history in the land. It's not about having possession of something.
For some reason, they don't want to have a dialogue.
One day, Lavoy's daughters visited the refuge to see him. The topic of children visiting the refuge was controversial, even among the occupiers, but Lavoy thought it showed the world a softer image, that they were just family men engaging in civil disobedience.
He had prepared a place for them to sleep and everything like that, but there was a rumor that had come that the FBI was going to raid that night. And so my husband was worried for the kids, and he says, you guys are going to have to leave. And so he made them leave.
Armed with a rifle, he explained to curious members of the media that he was sitting outside in the freezing temperatures to show that he wasn't going to hide from the FBI.
I have been raised in the country all my life. I love dearly to feel the wind on my face, to see the sunrise, to see the moon in the night. I have no intention of spending any of my days in a concrete box.
Afterwards, his face was shown repeatedly on news stations nationwide. As a result, Lavoie and his wife Jeanette lost custody of 4 foster children.
I started getting calls from the agency I worked for about our foster care, because we had 4 boys here. And they said, if he's home by Saturday, you'll be fine. But if he's not home by Saturday, they're gonna wanna take the boys and take your license. They did come and they took 2 of the boys, and then the other 2 boys left a couple days later.
So you're prepared to die, better dead than in a cell?
Absolutely. Dude, would you like to be in the cell?
Have FBI who's infiltrated, pretending to be media. We've got pictures of them out at the FBI compound getting ready to shoot people, and they're infiltrating. Okay, they're spying, they're listening. This is not freaking Nazi Germany. Okay, we're not in Nazi Germany, and we're going to expose the freaking Nazis. Okay.
The longer the occupation went, the sillier it seemed to get. One of the occupiers, named Kenneth Mettenbach, who liked to protest federal land ownership by building shelters on public land and rigging them with explosives, was arrested after driving a Malheur Wildlife Refuge truck into Burns.
Sometimes we make dumb choices, don't we?
You saying Kenneth's choices were dumb?
He has been such a great support to us. To take a truck and drive it in that is not registered and licensed yet to Harney County, which we hope soon will be, could have been a better choice.
Another occupier made news after he challenged Governor Chris Christie to 10 sumo matches.
Governor Christie, bring that big old belly over here and let's slap bellies.
There was one guy who walked around with an English broadsword, another guy named Brand New Thornton who liked to make a show of blowing a ritualistic horn, people made homoerotic fiction starring Ammon Bundy, and when the unprepared occupiers asked supporters to send snacks on Facebook, they received a box of dildos in the mail.
They spend and waste their money on all this hateful stuff to send out here to us. It's really ridiculous. Even this one was really funny, a bag of dicks. So we're gonna create a table and we're gonna continue to do work and do good for our country.
The first 2 weeks of the occupation were eventful enough to keep them in the news cycle. The Daily Mail put out an article exposing Cliven's bodyguard, Buddha Cavalier, for stolen valor. A 26-year-old half-Japanese guy named David Fry, who helped the occupiers with their computers, was exposed for having pro-Nazi and ISIS sympathies. Then it was revealed that another occupier named Neil Wampler had murdered his own father in a drunken rage in the 1970s.
There's God-fearing people in that building right now, and I know in my heart they think they're doing the right thing. Part of me believes they are, but they're not doing it the right way. Americans don't need to be fighting Americans right now. You need to stop what you're doing.
There was a fight between a man named Louis Arthur, the leader of a group called Veterans on Patrol, and some of the occupiers. Before the brawl, Louis Arthur had camped in front of the wildlife refuge for days, criticizing the occupation.
We came up here to de-escalate the situation and try to convince someone that having the federal government killing you is not going to make you a martyr, and the majority of the patriots are pounding on their keyboards. They're not going to rise up. But we also want the women and children removed from the compound. When the founding fathers marched on tyranny, they didn't take their wives and children with them into battle. Yet we see American patriots out here taking their wives and children with them into battle, knowing that this could end up being a Waco or a Ruby Ridge.
Louis said he was punched in the face by one of the occupiers while trying to get women and children inside to safely leave with them.
I got punched in the back of the head by Blaine Cooper, and then 2 other guys came at me, and they had one of the guys had his hand on his gun standing back, and we're unarmed. I go towards those guys, Blaine sucker punches me again, he moves in, Blaine punches him in the face and busts his face open, so I ordered my team to evac. We don't return violence with violence.
Some of the women and children at the refuge were named the Sharp Family Singers. They were a family of singers who had spent time at Camp Liberty in Bunkerville after the 2014 standoff. Some people felt uncomfortable with the Sharp family's presence, especially since they were all anticipating an FBI raid. Udala Sharp said that she planned to raise her 7 children at the refuge. In 2011, one of her children were taken by child services after reports of neglect and abuse. Eventually, the media started to lose interest in the occupation. law enforcement's hands-off approach and the occupiers' inactivity didn't sell stories. Also, the occupation was overshadowed when North Korea began a show of force by testing their nukes. There were much juicier events to cover than a bumbling group of patriots taking over a smattering of federal buildings in the middle of nowhere. Ammon was attempting to spark a nationwide movement. Without the press there to cover what they were doing, all of their work would be for nothing. Therefore, Ammon brainstormed ways to elicit attention from the media. In a stunt described as their boldest move since overtaking the refuge, the occupiers cut down 20 yards of barbed wire fence put up by the Fish and Wildlife Service. They said that they were acting on behalf of a local rancher named Tim Puckett, whose ranch bordered the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. Later, Tim Puckett said that he never spoke to the occupiers and that his ranch hands had to repair the fence. Quote, "I'm very upset. I have no grievances with the refuge or the BLM. I have BLM grazing permits that I use each year, and I am a good steward of the land. I do not depend on the federal government to raise my cattle. In no way do I feel entitled to the refuge for grazing. I was informed of the fence last fall prior to its construction, and it has not, nor will it, affect my cattle operation." The occupiers slipped into a steady pattern. As the days went by, their guard began to drop. Children visited the refuge to interview the Bundys for school assignments. Anti-public lands politicians visited to meet with the Bundys. The occupiers did military training in clear view of cameras. It began to feel like they might be able to remain there long enough to finally claim squatters' rights of the refuge.
Militants tried to shut down environmentalists from the Center for Biological Diversity this weekend.
Well, now, you will not shout me down, I'll tell you that. I was there.
No, you're doing the shouting down.
I was there when... Excuse me?
You're doing the shouting
down.
No,
I'm crushing the lies.
You cannot allow freedom of speech.
I'm crushing the lies. You have freedom of speech.
Run media.
Throughout the occupation, YouTube shock jock Pete Santilli live-streamed what was happening in Burns and the wildlife refuge.
Pete Santilli, spokesman for the ranchers in the Oregon standoff.
Can I finish my point? I want to call upon all of the grassroots Black Lives Matters people to come out here because there's more jobs out here than there are in the inner city selling heroin on behalf of Barack Obama's trafficking network.
Even though Pete Santilli never stayed at the refuge overnight, he said he'd stick around to provide the occupiers protection by being a truthful and independent reporter. And dressed in desert camo, he set about proving that.
FBI, you can bring your freaking guns and put a freaking bullet right here. Put a bullet right here. I'll take that first bullet, you disgusting, filthy, freaking... Oh my God. You pissed me off so bad. Fear and intimidation upon this community is intolerable. We will not cower to your tyranny, you jackbooted thugs. We will surround you with unarmed people, and we will crush you with constitutionality.
11 days into the standoff, Pete Santilli entered a Harney County community meeting, and when he started to interrupt Sheriff Ward, the people of Harney County made it clear that he was not welcome.
Oh my God, what are we gonna do? There's people out there wanting to enforce the Constitution. How will we save the children? Oh my God, we should take away all their guns. Oh, gotta go. Meeting's starting, bye.
Welcome everybody, good evening. Thank you. And while I love having them here, I'd like to see them go home.
How about the feds?
Well, we can't get them to go home. No, they're not going home either until we get this resolved.
They're causing the problems, Sheriff, and you know it.
And Tilly, shut up.
I love you, I love you guys.
Get out.
So I'm being escorted out for disruption?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Look at that. Pete Santilli speaking out, using his First Amendment. Let's throw spitballs at him. Boy, oh boy, I wonder why we're calling this place a communist community, because we got some commies running around town that want to shut down my First Amendment.
Throughout the occupation, Ryan Bundy and Lavoy Finicum drove to different counties to encourage ranchers to tear up their grazing permits. When they tried to get ranchers in Harney County to cancel their grazing permits at a ceremony, they were surprised to find out that no one wanted to. The grazing permit cancellation ceremony was a major part of Ammon's plan to spark a revolution in the western states. And when it didn't work out, it was the ultimate blow to the occupation, marking its end.
Ryan Bundy had tried to coordinate this ceremony where local ranchers would come and symbolically tear up their lease and symbolically, in a sense, start the Second American Revolution, overthrowing federal government power. They couldn't get a single rancher from Harney County. They had to get somebody from New Mexico. It turned out this guy from New Mexico, after the occupation, renewed his grazing lease.
Later, the occupiers showed up unannounced at a Harney County community meeting where locals in attendance made it clear that they wanted them gone.
It is time for you to go home.
Around 20 days into the occupation, Ammon and the others started to plan their next move. It had become clear to them that the revolution wouldn't kick off in Harney County, but they believed that they had a better chance around 90 miles north in Grant County. There was a constitutional sheriff in Grant County called Glenn Palmer who supported their movement. So on January 26, 2016, they left in 2 vehicles to go see him. Prior to their departure, the FBI and Oregon State Police were tipped off that all of the occupation's leaders were driving to Grant County. The authorities stopped Ammon's Jeep around 20 miles from the refuge and arrested him along with Buddha Cavalier and an FBI informant named Mark McConnell. Lavoy Finicum, Ryan Bundy, Ryan Payne, and 2 women named Shauna Cox and Victoria Sharp were behind them in another vehicle.
I'm going to meet the sheriff. The sheriff is waiting for us. So you do as you damn well please. But I'm not going anywhere. Here I am, right there. Right there, put a bullet through it. You understand? I'm going to go meet the sheriff. You back down or you kill me now. Go ahead, put the bullet through me. Okay.
If we take
Then
off,
you
where
get
they
Ryan
shoot,
back.
Shoot your tires out.
Most likely.
Okay, Ryan Ammon.
Why did they pull you over?
There's no service here.
Just because.
Okay, you ready?
Well, where's the guns?
They got him stopped. He can't get around it. I'm going to go. You guys ready?
Okay, get down.
Then you duck
Get
down.
down.
Give me that camera. Okay, give me this camera. Go. Got it. Are they shooting? Got it. Okay, stay down. Stay down. I need Stay a phone down. so I can call as soon as I get service. Wait up. Yeah, keep watching the phone.
Hang on.
Okay, they're shooting.
Hang on.
Okay, sit down. Okay, we're here.
Go ahead and shoot me.
Damn! Trying to.
Shoot me. Get on the ground. Shoot me.
Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down. Stay down.
Shoot me. You're going to have to shoot me.
Damn it. Are they shooting him? Did they shoot him? You assholes. Oh my God! Hold still. Hold still. Stay down.
You know, they kill people who oppose them. That's what they do. They're murderers.
Did you realize immediately that Lavoy was shot and killed, or?
I did, yes.
Mm-hmm. And how did you feel in that situation when that was all going down?
Well, I'm not going to share those feelings on camera.
And that's when I received the call from Ammon's wife, Lisa. And she's hysterical, screaming into the phone that they killed Lavoy. And we had to tell my kids, and my daughter was playing basketball at the time. And they still hadn't verified whether Lavoy's dead, but it was already on the television.
He was a very principled man and very devout. When he learned that something was true, he would act on that. And he was not a coward. Top of the line individual. There's nobody that's better in America than Lavoy.
How did you feel when Cliven said that he was a good sacrifice for the cause?
I didn't know that Cliven said that. I don't know what he really means by saying that. Lavoy stood for the Constitution and for his own convictions, not for Ammon or Cliven's or Hammond's cause. He stood for what he believed in. I didn't know Ryan and Ammon before all of this started. I didn't know the Bundys before any of this started. And so, yes, there has been some things that have kind of put a wedge between me and Ammon. And I'm not sorry for them because I feel like I had to stand up and draw a line and not let my husband be misrepresented because they knew him all of 5 minutes. Literally, you cannot tell the world who he was about every subject because all you know is this little piece of him where he stood with you about property rights. That doesn't give you license to talk about him, about all these other things, because you don't know how he would react. He is not you. And so yes, Ammon and I don't see eye to eye on a few things. He's a good man, I'm sure. But we haven't had much to say to each other that's been positive. He more or less told me that I was a disgrace and had destroyed everything that my husband stood for by the stands that I have taken. And by going out and speaking out and trying to garner support for my legal battle, and that he felt that that was a waste of time. It was very hurtful. I couldn't even believe that he even had the nerve to say that to me after my husband was murdered in the cause that he created.
The people at the refuge right now are free to go, and they must leave immediately. It is reported that Ammon Bundy is in custody by police. The roads are on lockdown out to the John Day meeting. Reports of shots being fired, and the report that we're getting right now is that 2 people have been shot. We're waiting here at the hospital to get confirmation of that, and we will provide that to you as soon as we possibly get it.
After Lavoie's death, the wildlife refuge was surrounded by law enforcement. Inside the refuge, there remained 4 holdouts: David Fry, Sean Anderson, Sandra Lynn Anderson, and Jeff Banta.
All you military that's been fighting for your country overseas, you can fight for your country right here in America. Get here, get some. This is history in the making. There are no laws in this United States now. This is a free-for-all Armageddon. If they stop you from getting here, kill them!
For the next 16 days, the final 4 occupiers had talks with the FBI and the media. David Fry, a 26-year-old tech guy, raised eyebrows as he live-streamed himself on YouTube.
But where's all the Americans? Where's all our supporters? We didn't get much, so now this is what it's come down to. You guys are gonna get to watch us die live on Defend Your Base live stream.
And make sure you tell my daughter why I died.
So, yes, we died fighting for our Constitution. The law of liberty. You guys think this is fake? Here's me. Here's ISIS boy. Here's Hitler acolyte, and you guys missed it. They were actually calling me a Satan worshiper not too long ago. So I got called every name out there, and so here I am. I'm all boogied out, ready to go, and you guys are gonna watch me die live on Defend Your Base.
One of the final occupiers, Jeff Banta, had only shown up to the wildlife refuge the night before Lavoie Finicum died. Regardless, he stuck around saying that he feared that the FBI would kill those that remained. While speaking to FBI negotiators, he suggested that they bring in Franklin Graham, the son of television evangelist Billy Graham, to assist in a peaceful surrender. And surprisingly, the FBI did just that. On February 11th at 9 a.m., Jeff Banta, Sean Anderson, and his wife, Sandra Lynn Anderson, surrendered. David Fry was the final remaining holdout. Thousands of people watched as he live-streamed himself talking to FBI negotiators and politicians. After several hours, David Fry finally agreed to surrender.
If everybody says hallelujah, I'll come out. Huh? Alrighty then, guys. You heard that? They're going to at least say hallelujah.
Okay.
I'll grab one more cookie. One more cigarette.
David, how's it going? Are you still talking to the FBI?
You're saying hallelujah! So I'm walking towards them right now.
Okay, stay calm.
I'm walking towards you, David. Keep walking, my friend. Hallelujah. Nice and easy. Yep, down right back here. You put your hand behind your back. Okay. All right. All right, folks. Everybody come on.
All right, good job, David.
They had directly taken on the federal government of the United States, the most powerful government that's ever existed on the planet, they weren't going to win. And anybody who had an illusion that somehow this was going to end well for them was frankly self-deluded. But people like Lavoy Finicum, Sean Anderson, and others who I've mentioned, they knew that this was going to end somehow and it wasn't going to be good for them.
Cliven Bundy, Ryan Bundy, and Ammon Bundy spent the next 2 years in detention awaiting 2 trials for the 2014 standoff and the 2016 occupation of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge.
Of that 2 years, I spent about a year of it in solitary confinement. They have a light overhead that they leave on 24/7, so you never have darkness to be able to actually sleep. And then, of course, they're looking in on you like you're in a fish tank, doing their counts and their checks on you, numerous times throughout the day. And you're just locked into that situation day after day, week after week, month after month. It messes with your mind, makes you go crazy. If anybody would treat an animal like that, they'd call it cruelty.
Ryan and Ammon spent their time in detention studying their cases.
I had a few more charges than everybody else had. I think I had 23 felony charges against me. When you're charged with a federal crime, the conviction rate is like nearly 99%. And so usually when you're charged, you're convicted. Because of the charges that were brought against me, it would amount to life sentence. And so my chance of winning were quite slim. They assigned to me a court-appointed attorney. I could tell that he was terrible guy. I asked him if he knew and understood the Constitution. He didn't. I asked him if he'd ever read it. He said, I think we read it in high school. So here's a guy who had spent his entire adult lifehood as an attorney and yet didn't read the Constitution. Are you kidding me? Second of all, he was an atheist, and yet I'm a firm believer in God. Third of all, he's just a liberal Democrat. I mean, talk about a piece of junk. I could see that if my life were placed in his hands, I'm a dead man. I did kneel in prayer to speak with my Father in heaven and ask for guidance. And as I was praying about the subject, inspiration came and he said, fire your attorney. And at first, that scared the living daylights out of me because I'm like, what do I do without an attorney? How do I defend myself? I don't know how to do it. And again, his answer came and he says, I will teach you what to do.
The trial lasted 7 weeks. The prosecution thought that they had an open and shut case. Ammon Bundy had announced to the world his intention to make a hard stand, and he invited people to take over federal buildings. There was no way the Bundys could win. The prosecution's case hinged on proving that the defendants had engaged in a conspiracy to impede federal employees. The prosecution showed jurors pictures and videos of the occupiers blocking the entrance to Malheur with trucks and tractors. They showed occupiers holding rifles in the Wildfire Tower. They showed footage of the occupiers firing guns. The jury seemed to be siding with the prosecution. Then it was revealed that the FBI had planted several informants amongst the occupiers.
There were, I believe, 15 informants. I do know of one that was particularly hired and came there. He went by the name of John Quammen was his stage name, so to speak. Fabio Menaggio was his real name.
According to the occupiers, John Quammen offered to train people in military combat.
He organized that training, and his whole purpose was to get that in film so that he can bring that into trial and make it look like we're planning this whole operation to attack town or whatever. I don't know what they were thinking. And it was interesting because they showed that film in trial. And they showed that film a dozen times at least, if not 20. Towards the end of the trial, we finally figured out who this John Quammen was. And we were finally able to expose him to the jury as an informant. When someone is a paid informant, anything they do to forward supposed crime cannot be held against those who are being charged with crime because it's fake. That made sway with the jury because the jury was like, hey, wait a second. You've been showing this video throughout the entire trial, and you knew all along you couldn't enter this stuff in according to the rules. And yet you've been pushing it, all to try to force this prosecution. And in other words, it backfired on them.
So the jury found Ammon, Ryan, and 5 others not guilty.
Write it down, world! Write it down! Yes!
This is history! They did it! Yes!
Prosecutors want to split the trials of 17 defendants facing charges in the armed confrontation at Cliven Bundy's ranch back in 2014.
Trial in Nevada was scheduled to last 12 weeks. In the process of studying and learning, we were discovering lots of atrocities that were being done by the government, things that they were trying to hide and keep out of the trial.
Surprising everyone, Ryan proved himself to be an adept attorney by catching the prosecution in a lie about cameras.
And this camera became an issue because I knew that the camera was there. I'm the one that knocked it over. They never charged me for knocking it over, and I think the reason why they didn't charge me for trying to knock it over is because they didn't want anyone to know that the camera was there. Going through all this discovery, I never saw any videos from that camera. Where is it? It's not in discovery at all. So I made a motion requesting what the camera was, what it was capable of, and all the data that was gathered by it. The prosecutors basically mocked me. They said, oh, he's just on a fishing expedition. He's just trying to delay time. So the judge sided with him. Motion denied. But then when we get into trial, I start questioning the witnesses. I go, did you know about this camera? No. Finally, one gal gets up there, and I said, was there a camera placed up at the Bundy's house? She goes, yeah, there was. Everybody's heads perk up. And I says, okay, and where was that going? She says, well, we had it set up to be a live feed on a large screen TV in the command center. Judge Navarro she perks up because not only had I made the motion, a couple months prior, but she was the one that denied it because I don't know what I'm talking about. But yet all of a sudden, we got a witness here that is testifying that video was live feeding into the command center on a large screen TV so they could see everything we were doing. And so then we started to ask questions, okay, well, where's the feed? Where's the record? And then the government tried to say, oh, well, we didn't keep a record. It was just live feeding, but we didn't record it. And the judge is like, no, I don't buy that a bit. You guys were recording and you guys are hiding the recording. And that turned into a huge reason why the case was dismissed.
So due to the prosecution withholding evidence, the judge declared a mistrial and dismissed all charges against the Bundys with prejudice, meaning that the Bundys could not be tried again for the 2014 standoff. Life returned to relative normality for a while. Ammon and Ryan Bundy both ran for governor, Ryan in Nevada, Ammon in Idaho, where he gained 17% of the vote both in 2016 and 2022. For the past several years, Ryan Bundy and Cliven have been living quiet lives, but Ammon Bundy seems like he never really got over the excitement of political dissent. He continues to organize standoffs. Sometimes they're over COVID restrictions, sometimes he's being wheeled out of a state capitol building while handcuffed.
He's doing no harm. He's a man of God. I mean, come on. That's right. Really? Stand up or not?
The state police tells us that Bundy was respectfully and repeatedly asked to leave the Idaho State Capitol building. He refused, was uncooperative. They say troopers were then forced to physically remove Bundy from the Senate gallery, taking him through a stairwell, and they placed him again in a wheelchair. He refused to walk, so for the second time in 24 hours, he was wheeled out of the State House and then put into a patrol vehicle.
Quammen, was it worth it?
Worth what?
I'll come back and get this one.
Most recently, he organized a protest against the hospital, as well as Child Protective Services. One of his followers said that their grandson was kidnapped and being held at the hospital. So a network of Ammon supporters harassed hospital employees, doxing them and sending them death threats. When Ammon claimed that the hospital was engaging in child trafficking for profit, he was sued for defamation. Ammon refused to participate in the trial. A jury found him liable for defamation and ordered Ammon and his co-defendants to pay the hospital $26 million in punitive damages. Currently, there's an arrest warrant for Ammon Bundy, and he's on the run, possibly hiding somewhere in Utah.
For a lawsuit, St. Luke's suing. I don't know how this has all come about, but anyway, my family's had a wonderful time, and now we're going to go back to our compound and hide behind our walls with AK-47s, according to Idaho statesman. Nah, we'll go back to living, back to work. And
out of all of the Bundy family members, Ammon's life has changed the most dramatically. Prior to the 2014 standoff, Ammon lived in Phoenix, Arizona, where he owned a truck maintenance company. Unlike Cliven and Ryan, he had nothing to do with the lands rights movement. He lived in the city with his young family and ran a business he borrowed money from the government to grow. 10 years later, and he's a fugitive at odds with the Mormon Church, militia groups, and even the widow of the martyr of his movement.
That I had suffered enough under their hands. I was not supposed to do that anymore. And so I'm not. I'm telling you right now, I am not going to suffer under their hands anymore. I have suffered enough. I don't owe anybody anything. And my life is not to be drug around in chains away from my family. I'd rather go back to Heavenly Father than to let that happen again. And I know that the Creator of this world has condoned my action in defending myself. And I really don't care if anybody supports that or not. I don't. Because I know it is right. And I know I will do that. And wherever anybody else sets is where you choose to be. And that is your choice. But mine is made up. My mind is made up. I did nothing wrong. I only did what was right. I stood for a baby. I spoke the truth. And wicked people are trying to destroy me and my family for that. And I have a right to defend myself.
Yeah.
What you just watched was only made possible by my patrons, who received early access to various cuts of this project as it was being made. Donations are what allows me to make ambitious projects like this one. Donations also help me to pay talented collaborators like cameraman Tate Hawver, composer Ryan Probert, and assistant editor Jim from Nightdocs. If you'd like to help support my future endeavors, consider the various donation methods in the description box below.